8 elite operators walked into that briefing room thinking they were the most dangerous people in it. They were wrong. She stood near the back wall, young, quiet, carrying a comms pack, wearing no rank worth noticing. They looked at her the way men always looked at her, briefly, then away. Support personnel, background noise. The kind of person you hand gear to, not orders. 48 hours later, one of them would be bleeding on a mountain ridge in northern Afghanistan. The mission would be burning, the target would be gone, and the only thing standing between 8 special operators and a body bag would be the woman they never bothered to learn the name of. Subscribe to the channel and follow this story to the end. You will not want to miss what happens next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from tonight? Let's see how far this story travels. The C-130 banked hard, left over the Hindu Kush, and the cargo hold groaned like something alive. Maya Voss gripped the nylon strap above her seat and rode the turbulence without expression, her eyes fixed on the dark porthole across from her. Outside there was nothing. No lights, no horizon, just the black void of high altitude and the distant suggestion of mountains she couldn't see but knew were there, enormous and patient, waiting like they always waited. The men around her weren't paying attention to the mountains. They were paying attention to each other, running through gear checks with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this so many times it had become muscle memory. 8 operators, all of them seasoned, all of them carrying the particular stillness of men who understood that the night ahead was not theoretical. She watched them without appearing to watch. The one called Derek Hale was at the far end of the bench, running a cleaning patch through the bolt of his rifle in slow, deliberate strokes. He was the team's primary sniper, long-limbed, sharp-faced, with the kind of weathered calm that came from years of lying motionless in positions most people couldn't tolerate for 20 minutes. He hadn't acknowledged her since the flight began. None of them had. Not really. She was comms and logistics, attached for the op, and she occupied exactly as much space in their attention as that designation suggested. Lucas Reed sat 3 seats down, already restless, rolling his thumb along the edge of his knife the way people fidget with worry beads. He was younger than the others by a visible margin, still carrying some brightness in his face that hadn't been fully burned away. He'd handed her a protein bar back in the armory, sliding it across the table without making eye contact, the kind of automatic helpfulness that wasn't rude exactly, just patronizing in a way he probably didn't register. "You want something to eat before we load up? Long night." "I'm fine." "It's just, I'm fine, Reed." He'd nodded and moved on, already cataloging her as someone who required management, someone who would need to be kept track of, kept safe, possibly extracted if things deteriorated. She understood. She didn't resent it. She filed it away. Commander Ethan Cole sat at the head of the bench closest to the cockpit door, and he was the only person in that hold whose relationship with her was different. He was big through the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-40s, with a face that had collected the miles. He was looking at the mission folder in his lap, but she knew he was also tracking the room. That was simply what Cole did. It was the reflex of command, the constant quiet accounting of every person and every variable in his perimeter. 3 days earlier, in a windowless room at Bagram, he'd looked at her across a table covered in maps and said 3 sentences. "They don't know who you are. They're going to assume your support. I need you to let them." She'd looked back at him for a moment. "How long?" "Until it matters." "And when it matters?" "You'll know." That was the whole conversation. Cole wasn't a man who used more words than the situation required, and neither was she. They understood each other in the clean, functional way that 2 people understand each other when they've both been reduced by experience to exactly what they are, nothing more. She was 29 years old. She had been a Marine for 8 years and a Scout sniper for 4. Her file, the real one, not the summary attached to this mission packet, was classified at a level that required 2 separate authorizations to access. She had made confirmed shots at distances that most qualified snipers would call theoretically possible on a good day with ideal conditions. She had twice been the only person to walk away from situations where no one was supposed to walk away. Inside SOCOM channels, in the particular shorthand that special operations people used when they needed to reference something without explaining it, Her call sign was passed around the way you'd pass around a weather forecast. Briefly, practically, with the understanding that it meant something. Iron Wolf. She didn't love the name. She hadn't chosen it. Someone had given it to her after an op in Hellman 3 years ago that she wasn't supposed to talk about, and it had stuck the way those things stick, without ceremony, without her permission. She shifted her weight, checked the clock on her wrist, and went back to memorizing the terrain. The briefing at Camp Raven Hollow had lasted 90 minutes, and she had spent most of it standing against the back wall while Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, the team's senior NCO, walked them through the objective package. The target was a man named Khalid Sarohi, mid-40s, former Pakistani military, currently operating as a logistics coordinator for a network that had been running weapons, personnel, and targeting intelligence through the Kunar Valley for the better part of 2 years. He wasn't a foot soldier. He wasn't even a commander in the conventional sense. He was an architect, the kind of operational mind that built the scaffolding other people fought inside, and he had been patient about it in a way that made him exponentially more dangerous than anyone with a rifle. Target is currently sheltering at a compound here, Webb said, tapping the imagery. 14 kilometers northeast of the Kunar River. Elevation 2,300 meters. Secondary structure here, probable weapons cache. We've had eyes on it for 6 days. He moves once, maybe twice a week. Tonight's the window. The compound was a loose collection of structures built into the rock shelf of a ridgeline. Mud walls, corrugated roofing, a generator shed on the northern side. It looked unremarkable in the satellite imagery, the kind of place that was deliberately designed to look unremarkable. There were guards. 6 confirmed, possibly 2 additional rotating through a pattern that Intel hadn't fully mapped, and the approaches were limited by terrain. You came at it from the west along a goat trail, or you didn't come at it at all. Derek Hale studied the imagery for a long time. What's the engagement distance from the primary overwatch? Northwest Ridge puts you at 650, maybe 700 meters depending on final position. Hale nodded slowly, doing the arithmetic in his head. Doable. Wind's going to be a factor up there. It's always a factor up there, Webb said. I want to pre-stage at 0200, get established before they rotate the guard. Agreed. Nobody asked Maya anything. She stood with her hands loosely at her sides and listened to every word. What she was listening for, and what nobody had mentioned yet because the intelligence package hadn't prioritized it, was a particular data point from a signals intercept that had been flagged and then lost in the shuffle of the mission prep cycle. She had read it in the original package and then watched it disappear from the briefing summary, either deliberately cut for brevity or accidentally dropped in the consolidation. The intercept referenced a second shooter, not a guard, not a perimeter sentry. A positioned shooter, someone establishing a hide, someone with a long gun. She had flagged it to Cole privately, the morning before departure. There's a counter-sniper reference in the SIGINT from day 4. He'd looked at her steadily. I saw it. It's not in the mission package. No. Why not? Because Intel assessed it as low confidence and the team lead didn't want to complicate the optics of the op. She had looked at him for a moment without speaking. That's a problem, she said finally. Yes, Cole said. It is. He hadn't told the team. The decision wasn't his to override, and both of them knew it. But Cole had his own way of addressing problems he couldn't fix through channels. He told her to come. He told her to stay quiet and let them think she was background. She understood what she was on this mission. She was the contingency nobody had put on the board. The goat trail was exactly as advertised. Narrow, broken, stitched together with loose shale that shifted under every step. They moved in single file with no light, the team using their nods to navigate while Maya kept pace behind Reed, who kept glancing back at her with an expression she chose not to acknowledge. The air at elevation had that specific quality she associated with mountains, thin and brutally cold, carrying the smell of dry stone and something else, something older, the faint mineral scent of altitude itself. Her breath came out in small pale shapes that disappeared instantly into the dark. They'd been moving for 40 minutes when Cole raised his fist and the column stopped. She watched him crouch and move to the front where Webb was waiting, both of them looking at something on Webb's map with a small, filtered light. Guard rotation happened early, Webb said, voice low. Sat feed shows 2 of them on the south wall instead of 1. They shifted the pattern. Changed or moving through rotation? Can't tell from here. Could be temporary. Cole looked up at the ridgeline. Hale. How long to establish? Hale was already unslung from his team position, moving to the edge of the trail where he could see the angle. 20 minutes to the ridge. Another 10 to get set. I want to be up there before they're due to rotate again. Make it 15. I'll need 15, Hale. A pause. Roger that. Cole looked back down the column, and his eyes moved past Reed, past the others, and found her. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. She gave him a single, small nod. He looked away. Right. They split the team at the base of the ridge. Hale took his spotter, a quiet, methodical operator named Garza, and they angled toward the northwest elevation. The rest of the team, Cole, Webb, Reed, and 3 others, held in a shallow depression below the ridgeline, maintaining spacing, watching the compound through their optics. Maya took a position 12 meters to Cole's right, behind a fractured boulder that gave her concealment in 3 directions and a clear sightline both to the compound and to the ridge where Hale was climbing. She settled in. Opened her pack. The rifle she removed was not the comms equipment anyone watching would have expected. It was a Barrett MRAD, configured in .338 Lapua Magnum, with a folded stock she extended now and locked with a quiet, definitive click. She mounted the scope, a Vortex Razor HD in 5-27 power, and worked through the setup with the economical movements of someone who had performed this sequence in darkness, in weather, in circumstances considerably less forgiving than this. Nobody was watching her. They were watching the compound, which was exactly what she wanted. The MRAD went onto the small tripod mount she'd set into the rock, and she settled behind it, pulling a small notebook from her chest pocket. Wind data, elevation corrections, pre-calculated holds for the ranges she'd mapped from the terrain analysis. She worked through the numbers quietly, adjusting the scope's elevation turret, checking the parallax. 720 meters to the compound's north gate. She had made shots at 700 on a bad day. She began scanning. The compound looked quiet from here. 2 figures on the south wall, as Webb had said, moving slowly, the orange glow of a cigarette visible for a moment before one of them cupped it. There was a light in the secondary structure, the kind of diffuse yellow that meant a lantern or a generator-fed bulb rather than anything high-powered. The main structure was dark. She shifted her scan. The ridgeline opposite the compound, the eastern ridge, the one the team hadn't considered in the planning because it was 600 meters beyond the objective and looked down at an angle that put it out of conventional thinking, caught her attention in the way that things catch your attention when you know what you're looking for. She didn't see anything. That was the problem. She'd been scanning ridgelines for 4 years, and she knew the difference between an empty piece of terrain and a piece of terrain that was working hard to appear empty. The eastern ridge was doing the second thing. There was a quality to it, a stillness that was almost architectural, deliberate, positioned. Her radio earpiece clicked once. Hale's voice, clipped and professional. Overwatch established. I have eyes on target structure. No movement on primary. Copy, Cole's voice came back. I'm going to give it 5 minutes and then acquire. Understood, standing by. Maya kept her scope on the eastern ridge. She was thinking about the SIGINT intercept. Low confidence, Intel had called it. She'd read the original language, probable counter-sniper element, unconfirmed positioning, source reliability grade C. Grade C. Grade C meant the source had been right before and wrong before, and nobody was certain enough to stake a mission on it, which was how you ended up staking a life on it instead. She quartered the ridge systematically, top to bottom, left to right, checking vegetation, checking geometry, checking anything that would give away a position that didn't want to be found. There. West face, 40 meters below the ridgeline itself. A shallow depression in the rock face that she almost dismissed as shadow. And then didn't, because the shadow moved, just slightly, just once, the kind of involuntary micro-shift that a human body makes when it's been in the same position too long. Someone was there. She held her crosshairs on the spot and did not move. Cole, she said very quietly on the command net. A pause. Go. Eastern ridge, west face, 40 below crest. I have what I think is a hide. Another pause, longer this time. Hale, you hear that? I'm looking. A beat. I don't see. The rifle shot from the eastern ridge was not loud in the way people who've never been shot at expect. It was a sharp, flat crack that the mountain swallowed almost immediately, and by the time the sound registered, the effect was already visible. Derek Hale went down. Not the way people go down in movies, not dramatically, not in slow motion. He simply stopped being upright and became horizontal, and his rifle swung sideways and clattered against the rock, and Garza's voice came over the net in a single hard word that wasn't a call sign or a report, just a sound. Hale! Then everything happened at once. The compound erupted, not with confusion, but with coordination, which meant the people inside had been waiting, had known the general timing, if not the exact moment, which meant the intelligence on this objective was compromised, which meant this was not a meeting engagement and not a reaction to their presence. This was a trap they had walked into with a full briefing package and a primary sniper who was now down on a ridge 700 meters from the objective. Cole's voice on the net was absolutely controlled. Contact east. Hale is down. Webb, pull security on the north. Reed, Kowalski, with me. Establish cover on the south approach. Everyone move. She was already moving, not toward cover, toward position. She picked up the MRAD and its tripod, relocated 6 meters to a better angle on the eastern ridge, and got back down behind it in the time it took Reed to reach Cole's position. Her crosshairs swept back to the shadow on the west face of the eastern ridge. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a rifle, long, suppressed, already reacquiring. She heard Cole's voice, quieter now, not on the main net, directly to her. Voss? I see him. Can you Yes. The compound was going loud behind her, muzzle flashes from 2 positions, the distinctive rattle of an AK variant, someone shouting in Pashto. Garza was talking on the net in short, controlled fragments, giving a casualty report. And what she heard through the noise was that Hale was breathing, which meant she had time. She had exactly as much time as it took the eastern ridge shooter to settle back into his position and acquire the next target. She brought the crosshairs to center, made the wind call. 16 kilometers per hour from the northwest, left to right at her position, which meant right to left at the target's elevation. Adjusted, held. A figure on the south wall broke from cover and started running. Cole's voice, tight. Voss, I need that ridge shooter down before... Stand by. The figure on the south wall didn't matter. The figures on the south wall weren't going to kill a SEAL team. Not tonight. The shooter on the eastern ridge was the only problem that mattered, because he had already found one person in a hide at 700 meters in the dark. And if he found another one, the math of this night got considerably worse. She let her breath out halfway. She held. She pressed the trigger. The MRAD hit her shoulder with its familiar, authoritative weight, and downrange, the shadow on the west face of the eastern ridge stopped moving in a way that was final. The mountain absorbed the echo. Then her radio crackled, and the voice that came through it was Cole's, and it was different now. Not the commander managing chaos, but something else. Something deliberate. Something that acknowledged what had just shifted in the arithmetic of this operation. Iron Wolf Sniper, he said, clearly, on the main net where everyone could hear it. Take point. She had already moved the scope to the compound's north gate. Iron Wolf moving to primary position, she said. And everything that happened next happened at 700 meters, in the dark, in the thin, cold air of the Hindu Kush, through the glass of a scope that had no opinion about anything except accuracy. The north gate opened. 3 figures came through it at a low run, moving in a tactical spread that told her immediately these weren't guards stumbling out in reaction. They were trained, they had a plan, and the plan involved flanking the position where Cole's element had gone to ground. She put the first one down at the gate. The second one made it 8 meters before she found him. The third broke right toward a rock outcropping that would have given him a covered approach to Webb's position on the north, and she tracked him through the scope with the particular patience that wasn't really patience at all, but something more mechanical. The absence of hurry, the understanding that the target's movement was a variable she was already accounting for. And she pressed the trigger at the moment his trajectory committed him to a line and he had no more options left. The outcropping was empty when he reached it. He didn't reach it. Reed's voice came over the net, ragged at the edges. "What? Who is... Where is that fire coming from?" Nobody answered him. Cole was already moving, pulling his element toward the compound's western wall, where the goat trail gave them an approach under the ridge's shadow. She heard him on the net, clipped and precise. "Reed, on me. Webb, hold your position until we're at the wall. Garza, what's Hale's status?" "He's conscious." Round took him in the upper left shoulder, went through. "He's losing blood, but he's talking." "Can he move?" "With help." "Then move him. Back down the trail, 200 meters. Wait for extract." "Copy." She kept scanning. The compound had gone briefly quiet after the three from the north gate. The specific silence of people recalculating, people who had expected something and gotten something different. She knew that silence. She had been on the other end of it before, standing in a compound somewhere while a variable she hadn't planned for rearranged her expectations. It lasted approximately 90 seconds before someone made a decision and the next phase of whatever was happening started. She was using the 90 seconds. The generator shed on the north side had a light in it now, a moving light, a flashlight, or a headlamp. Someone inside making a rapid decision about something. She watched it and made a guess based on the movement pattern. They were moving something or someone, the kind of controlled, purposeful activity that meant the target was transitioning. "Cole, go." Generator shed, north side, movement. "I think they're moving Sarohai." A pause, and she could hear him breathing, running. "How long?" "He's on foot. He goes to the secondary structure or out the east wall. The east wall puts him on open ground for 40 meters before he hits the tree line. If he's going to run, that's when." "How long do you need?" 1 second. She heard something in the net that might have been a quiet sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. Cole's voice, dry. "Copy that." The generator shed light went still. Then the east wall's wooden gate, barely visible at this angle, swung open. 2 men came out first, security, moving to establish a perimeter on the open ground, checking angles. They were good. They moved in a pattern that suggested training, not just experience, and they put themselves in positions that would have screened a third person following them. Would have. She put the first security element down before he reached his position. The second one broke left, reached cover, and she lost him in the dead ground behind a rock formation. That was fine. He wasn't the problem. The third figure had emerged from the gate by now and was moving fast. Not running, but walking with the specific purposeful urgency of someone who has been told there is time, but not much time. Medium height, dark clothing, moving toward the tree line. She read the distance at 760 meters, longer than the others. The wind had shifted slightly in the last 2 minutes, clocking around from the northwest toward a more northerly direction, and she made the adjustment on the turret without taking her eye from the scope. "Cole, I have a mover. East wall. Heading for the tree line. Fits the profile." "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. We need him alive." She hadn't intended to. "Copy. He reaches the trees. I lose him." "How long?" 30 seconds. "We're not at the wall yet." 20 seconds. "Cole." "I hear you." 15. "Cole, I can put a round past him. Stop him without... Negative. If you miss the margin, I won't." The silence on the net had a particular texture. 10 seconds. "Voss?" Cole's voice had something in it she didn't hear often from commanders. Not doubt, not refusal, something more careful than either of those. "Your call." She tracked the figure, calculated. The man had a slight rightward drift in his movement, compensating for the slope, favoring his left foot. She watched it for 2 full strides to confirm the pattern. She dropped her point of aim 18 inches to the right of his current trajectory, below the knee, and accounted for the drift. The shot went downrange. The figure on the open ground stumbled, went down on one knee, and stayed there. Not dead. Not going anywhere. Cole's voice came through, and she had the impression he'd been holding his breath. Confirmed stop? Confirmed. He's down, conscious, right leg. You have maybe 4 minutes before his security regroups. A beat. Then, Webb, move up. Reed, on the east wall. We have a stopped mover. She was already scanning back to the compound. The second security element who'd reached cover, a figure visible now on the south wall, someone moving inside the main structure. She worked through them. Not quickly, not dramatically. With the specific economy of attention that made the difference between a sniper and someone who simply owned a long-range rifle. Each shot was a decision made and completed before the next one began. No wasted motion, no wasted rounds. Reed's voice, somewhere far below and to her left, came over the net with something in it that she'd been expecting. The sound of a man revising his understanding of the world in real time. Where is that? Is that coming from our side? Reed, stay on task, Cole said. Sir, there's a sniper. Reed, on our position that I cannot. Reed, shut up and move. A pause. Yes, sir. She almost smiled. By the time Cole's element reached the east wall, 3 of the remaining compound security were down, and the 4th had retreated inside the main structure. She tracked the doorway and waited, giving Cole's people room to work, watching the approaches for anyone she might have miscounted. The radio traffic became compressed and urgent, the particular shorthand of a direct action in its final phase, when everything is happening simultaneously and the grammar of communication collapses to its minimum. Wall, moving. Copy, watch the doorway. On it. Reed, left. Left, moving. Structure clear on the north side. Moving to the mover. Voss, we have eyes on, stand by. She stood by. The compound fell quiet in stages, the way water drains, not all at once but progressively, pool by pool, until the sounds of contact were replaced by the sounds of consolidation. She heard Cole's voice, distant and controlled, and then nothing, and then Cole again. Mover is Sarohi. Confirmed. She let out a breath that had been partly held for approximately 6 minutes. Copy, she said. Medical on him now. Voss, what's your status? She looked around her position. The rock she'd been lying behind had a fresh gouge in it from a round she hadn't noticed being fired. Somebody below the compound had found her angle and tried for it, which meant she'd been visible for at least one shooter and hadn't known it. She filed that away for the after action with the flat, neutral acknowledgement of someone cataloging information rather than having a reaction. I'm up, she said. Ready to move when you are. A pause. Longer than the tactical pauses that had filled the last 20 minutes. Cole's voice came back differently. Not on the command net, but on the direct channel, just the 2 of them. You told me 30 seconds on that mover. Yes. You had maybe 8. The wind shifted. I had to recalculate. Another pause. You made a non-lethal shot at 760 meters in the dark, he said, on a moving target, with a shifted wind, on 8 seconds of decision time. She looked out at the dark mountain and said nothing. I'm going to need you to explain something to me, Cole said. What? How do I write that up in a way anyone is going to believe? She thought about it. You could leave that part out, she said. Yeah, he said. I probably could. Chum. The extract point was a flat shelf 2 kilometers back down the trail, wide enough for one helicopter and not particularly comfortable for anyone. They reached it in just under 40 minutes. Cole's element with Sarohi between them, zip-tied and pale from blood loss and shock. The right leg wrapped tight by Webb, who had trained as a combat medic before he became anything else. Garza had Hale there already, propped against a rock with a pressure bandage on his shoulder, and the particular grim expression of a man who understood that he'd been shot and wasn't dead, and was choosing to focus on the second part of that. He looked up when she came through the perimeter. She hadn't been sure what she expected. She didn't spend much time anticipating people's reactions to her, mostly because the range of reactions tended to be narrow, and she'd cycled through all of them before. Hale looked at her for a moment with something she couldn't immediately categorize. You took the East Ridge? He said. Yes. First round? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. 700? About that. Maybe a little more. He looked down at his hands, then back up. I've been doing this for 11 years, he said. She waited. I had him sighted before I got hit. I thought I had him sighted. I miscalculated the angle on the west face and put my position where he could see me before I could see him. It's a difficult angle, she said. You found it. I was looking specifically for it. Why? She thought about how to answer that, and then decided the straightforward version was probably the most useful one. There was an intercept in the original intelligence package. Counter sniper reference, low confidence. It got cut from the mission brief. Hale stared at her. Who else knew? Cole. He processed that. And he brought you. Yes. As contingency. Yes. Hale looked at the bandage on his shoulder, then at the darkness they'd come out of, then back at her. I was going to tell you to stay out of the way when we were gearing up, he said. I decided it wasn't worth the conversation. It wasn't. No, he said. It really wasn't. Reed found her while they were waiting for the helicopter. She heard him coming. He wasn't trying to be quiet, which meant he wasn't sure of his reception and was announcing himself preemptively, giving her a chance to shut the conversation down before it started if that was what she wanted. She didn't say anything. He sat down on the rock 2 feet to her left and was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkness. I counted 11, he said finally. She didn't answer. 11 rounds from the time the contact started until Cole called the compound clear. I might have missed some. I was kind of busy. 12, she said. He looked at her. 12. I don't count the one for Sarowi's legs separately from the fire mission. Some people do. Reed thought about that for a moment. I gave you a protein bar, he said. Yes. Because I thought you might need... I know why. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said. Not elaborated, not explained. Just put out there plainly, in the way of someone who understood that elaboration would make it worse. She looked at him. He was young. She'd assessed that correctly in the armory, and the night had aged him in the particular way that contact ages people who are new enough to still feel it fully. His face was dirty, and his hands were still, and he was sitting with the weight of a man who had revised something significant about his understanding of how the world worked. She didn't think he was a bad person. She'd never thought he was a bad person. He was a person who had been handed a set of assumptions and hadn't thought to question them, which was different. Eat the protein bar next time, she said. Offer it to everyone or don't offer it to anyone. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Okay, hey. The helicopter came in over the ridge with its navigation lights off, dropping fast toward the flat shelf, the rotor noise filling the mountain air. Everyone was on their feet before it touched down. She broke down the MRAD in the 30 seconds before boarding, folded the stock, packed it clean, slung the case over her shoulder, moved to the bird. Cole was standing at the ramp. He didn't say anything when she passed him. He didn't need to. He'd already said the only thing that mattered, on the open net, in the dark, on a mountain in northern Afghanistan, in front of 8 people who had all just learned something they were going to carry for the rest of their careers. Iron Wolf Sniper. Take point. She stepped onto the ramp. The helicopter lifted. Below them, the mountain went back to what it was before they arrived. Stone and dark and cold and patient. The way mountains are patient, which is to say, completely, and without any opinion about what had just happened on its slopes. But what had happened, happened. And in the debrief room at Camp Raven Hollow, when they pulled Sarohi's network files and found the second shooter's name on a list that intelligence had been building for 14 months, the man at the top of that list, the one who had coordinated the counter-sniper ambush that had been designed to kill an entire SEAL element on a mountain in the Kunar Valley, would read the after-action report and find a call sign he didn't recognize. He would ask about it. The answer he received would not reassure him, because the answer was simple. Iron Wolf was still operational, and Iron Wolf had not missed. The debrief started at 04:30 and ran until past sunrise, and by the end of it, the room smelled like cold coffee and the particular staleness of people who had been awake too long trying to make something coherent out of something that wasn't. Camp Ravenhollow's debrief room was a converted storage space, cinder block walls, a folding table that was slightly too short for the chairs around it, fluorescent lights that flickered once every few minutes with the consistency of a slow heartbeat. Someone had taped a laminated map of the Kunar Valley to the wall, and it had come loose at the top right corner, and nobody had fixed it. Maya sat at the far end of the table and said very little. That wasn't unusual. Debriefs for support personnel were largely procedural: comms logs, supply accountability, a brief statement of position and activity during the operation. Nobody expected anything from her beyond the minimum, and she gave them the minimum, clearly and without elaboration. The man running the debrief was a colonel named Briggs who had flown in from Bagram at 0300 and was operating on about 90 minutes of sleep and a visible irritation that he wasn't distributing evenly. He was 50s, thick through the chest, with the particular manner of a senior officer who had long ago stopped being interested in impressing people and had moved into a register of blunt institutional authority that he wore like a coat. He worked through Cole's team sequentially, which meant Maya was last. She watched him move through Reed's statement, Webb's, Garza's. The accounts of the contact, the casualty, the objective, the capture. Each one was clipped and professional and added a piece to the picture Briggs was assembling on his notepad. When he got to Hale, there was a pause. Hale was sitting 2 seats to Maya's left, his left arm in a sling that the base medic had fitted 3 hours ago. The shoulder wound was clean. The round had gone through the trapezius at an angle that missed the clavicle and the major vasculature, and had done significant muscular damage without killing anything essential. He was going to be in a sling for 6 weeks and a rehabilitation program for 3 months after that. He was, by any reasonable measure, lucky. He didn't look like a man feeling particularly lucky. "Walk me through the moment of contact," Briggs said. "I was established in the overwatch position. I had eyes on the compound, primary target structure, and I was in the acquisition phase. I had not yet identified the target. And the incoming round? I didn't hear it before it hit, suppressed or close to it. The shooter on the eastern ridge, at my estimate 600 to 650 from my position, had established a hide I hadn't identified." Briggs wrote something. "You reviewed the intelligence package prior to insertion?" "Yes." "The counter-sniper reference in the Day 4 SIGINT, was that discussed during your mission planning?" A pause. "It was not in the mission brief I received." Briggs looked up. "But it was in the original package. I'm told it was assessed low confidence and cut. Were you aware of it?" "Not until after the contact." Briggs's eyes moved to Cole, who was sitting across the table and slightly to the right, with his hands flat on the table surface and an expression that committed him to nothing. "Commander Cole?" "Sir?" "The Day 4 intercept." "I was aware of it." "It wasn't in your mission brief." "No, sir. The intel assessment was grade C. The decision to cut it was made above my level." "But you knew about it?" "Yes." "And how did that knowledge influence your operational planning?" Cole held Briggs's gaze for a moment. "I brought an additional asset," he said. The room was quiet. Briggs looked at his notepad. Then he looked at the end of the table, at Maya, who had been watching this exchange with the same calm attention she brought to most things. "Sergeant Voss." "Sir?" "Your role on this operation was listed as communications and logistics support." "Yes, sir." "Is that an accurate description of what you did last night?" She considered the question with the straightforwardness it deserved. "No, sir." Briggs waited. "I held a secondary sniper position. I neutralized the counter-sniper element on the eastern ridge, provided fire support during the compound assault, and placed a precision non-lethal shot on the primary target during his exfiltration attempt." The room was quiet for a different reason now. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it shifted, the way light shifts when a cloud moves across it. Not dramatic, but visible. "At what range?" "The eastern ridge shooter was at approximately 700 meters. The compound engagement ranged from 680 to 740. The non-lethal shot on Sarohi was at 760. "In the dark?" "Yes, sir." "With a wind shift?" "There was a shift of approximately 12 degrees in the final 30 seconds before I took the shot. Yes." Briggs wrote on his notepad for a long time without speaking. Your file says you're a scout sniper. Yes, sir. Your file says you've been attached to this FOB as support for, he checked the paper, the last 11 days. Yes, sir. Your file, Briggs said, and there was something in his voice now that wasn't quite flat anymore, is extremely brief for someone who apparently just did what 5 people in this room have described. She said nothing. I'm going to want your full record, he said. You'll need to submit the request through SOCOMJ2, she said. There are 2 authorization levels on it. Briggs put his pen down. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at the table. Briggs looked at the fluorescent light that had just flickered. Dismissed, he said finally, to the room in general. Cole, stay. Was it. She found out later from Webb what Briggs had said to Cole after the room cleared. Webb had been in the hallway and had not been trying to eavesdrop, and had heard most of it anyway, because Briggs was a man who had spent 30 years giving orders in loud environments, and his indoor voice was other people's outdoor voice. What Briggs had said, approximately, was that the operation had been compromised at the intelligence level, that the capture of Sarohi was the only outcome that justified the exposure, and that whoever had authorized the decision to classify Maya's actual role on the mission package was going to have a conversation with him that they would find uncomfortable. What Cole had said in response, Webb reported, was less. What Cole had said was, she volunteered to go as support, said it would be cleaner that way, didn't want to complicate the team dynamic, which was true, which was also incomplete, but true was enough for the record. She slept 4 hours and woke up because someone was knocking on the door of the small room she'd been assigned at the far end of the personnel block, and the knock had the particular cadence of someone who had been told to come now and was not happy about having been told. She looked at the time. 9:30. Give me a minute, she said. She dressed quickly and opened the door. It was Reed. He looked like he'd slept approximately as much as she had, which was to say, not enough, and he was carrying 2 cups of coffee that he extended toward her with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, offering, apologizing, and trying to figure out how to be in her presence now that he knew what she was. She took the coffee. Thank you. Yeah. He leaned against the doorframe. Webb said Briggs kept Cole for 40 minutes. I heard. Is that going to be a problem? She sipped the coffee, which was terrible in the reliable way of FOB coffee everywhere, burnt and over-extracted and somehow also weak. For who? For you, for the... He gestured vaguely. The whole thing. The mission. The mission is complete. Sarohi is in custody. Hale is alive. I know, but... Reed. He stopped. Why are you here? She said, not unkindly. He thought about it. I wanted to make sure you were... I don't know. I wanted to say something. You said it last night. I know. I wanted to say it again, I guess, in daylight. He looked at his own coffee cup. My team lead back at Lejeune used to say the problem with being good at your job is that people either can't see it or they resent it. He said there's no middle ground. She didn't say anything. I think I was in the first category, he said. I couldn't see it because I wasn't looking. Most people aren't. Does that bother you? She considered the question with more attention than he probably expected her to give it. It used to, she said finally. When I was younger. I spent a lot of energy being bothered by it. What changed? I figured out that being bothered by it was expensive and didn't produce anything useful. Reed was quiet for a moment. That's very... I don't know if that's healthy or sad. Probably both, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Are you sticking around? For now. Cole has another tasking in the queue. He wants me read in. Same arrangement? She looked at him. Different arrangement, she said. That's... The second tasking came through 48 hours later, and the briefing for it was different in every way that mattered. She sat at the table, not against the wall. At the table, with the others, with her own copy of the intelligence package, and when Webb set up the imagery on the board, he angled it so she could see it clearly without repositioning, which was a small thing, and which told her everything she needed to know about what had shifted in the room's understanding of the geometry. The new target was a man named Faruk Nazarov, Uzbek national, mid-30s, operating as the financial and communications backbone of the same network that Sarohi had been coordinating. The capture of Sarohi had done significant damage to the network's logistics arm, but Nazarov was the nerve center of its communications, and the network could rebuild logistics more easily than it could rebuild its encrypted communication architecture. He was, in the language of the intelligence community, a high-value target. He was also considerably harder to reach than Sarohi had been. "He moves," Webb said, tapping the imagery. "Not randomly, but consistently. He has a pattern, but the pattern changes on a cycle we haven't fully mapped. We've had eyes on him at 3 locations in the last 2 weeks. Here, here, and here. 3 taps, each landing on a different terrain type: urban, semi-rural, mountain. He's not staying anywhere longer than 72 hours. Support network? Cole asked. Substantial. He travels with 4 to 6 personal security, minimum. Each location he uses has pre-positioned resources. We're seeing evidence of advanced teams, which means he has people running ground truth before he moves." "So he's been burned before," Maya said. Heads turned, which she noticed and which told her the room was still calibrating. "We assess so, yes," Webb said. "There's some SIGINT suggesting a compromise in the Kunduz network about 8 months ago that forced him to change his movement cycle. He's been more cautious since." "What's the current best intelligence on his next location?" 2 candidates. The semi-rural position here, which we've been tracking through pattern analysis, or a 3rd location we haven't confirmed yet. There's an intercept suggesting a mountain site north of the Panjshir, but we haven't been able to geolocate it precisely. She looked at the imagery for the semi-rural position, a small village on the eastern slope of a valley, surrounded by agricultural land that was mostly fallow at this time of year. The village had 1 road in and 1 road out, which meant Nazarov's security team would have established observation on both approaches well before he arrived. The terrain around it was open for 400 meters in every direction before the ground rose enough to give cover. "Approach to the semi-rural site is going to be a problem," she said. "Yes," Webb said. "You'd need to be in position before his advance team arrives. If he's running advance teams, they're going to clear that 400-meter perimeter as standard procedure." "We assessed the same." "How long is the window between the advance team departure and Nazarov's arrival, historically?" "Between 2 and 6 hours. Variable." "That's not a window," Cole said. "That's a guess." "Yes, sir." The room was quiet for a moment, everyone looking at the same imagery and doing the same math and arriving at the same unsatisfying conclusion. "What about the Panjshir site?" Maya asked. "We don't have a location. We have an intercept." "What was the intercept?" Webb looked at her, then at Cole, then back at her. He pulled a sheet from the bottom of the folder and slid it across the table. She read it. The intercept was fragmentary, 12 words in Dari, pulled from a burst transmission that had been caught partly and decoded imperfectly. The translation offered 2 possible readings, and one of them was geographically specific in a way that Intel had apparently not prioritized, because the geographic reference had been marked as ambiguous and filed under the broader Panjshir search area without further analysis. She read it twice. "This reference here," she said, pointing, "above the shepherd's winter line. That's not a generic geographic description." Webb leaned over to look. Intel assessed it as idiomatic. "It might be. Or it might be a specific landmark that someone who knows that region would recognize immediately." She looked up. "Who built this intercept package?" "Bagram SIGINT cell." "Do they have anyone with ground experience in the Panjshir?" Webb's expression suggested the answer was no, and that he had not previously considered this a gap. "I spent 4 months in the Panjshir Valley in 2019, she said. "Different operation, different tasking, but I know the terrain." Cole looked at her steadily. Shepherd's winter line, in that context, means the elevation above which shepherds don't keep animals after the first hard frost. In the Panjshir, that's a consistent band between about 2,800 and 3,000 meters. Above that line means 30 plus. She traced a line on the imagery with her finger. There are 3 viable structures in that elevation range in this sector. 2 of them are on routes that his security element couldn't clear efficiently with a 4 to 6 man team. "And the third?" She tapped the imagery. Old hydroelectric survey station, Soviet era. Been abandoned since the 80s, but the structure is intact. We surveyed it in 2019 for potential use as a cache site. It's got 3 approaches, 1 accessible by vehicle, 2 by foot. Generator capability, if they brought fuel, and it's defensible. The room absorbed that. That's a significant inference from 12 words of degraded intercept, Webb said. Yes, she said. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at the imagery. Pull the 2019 survey file on the Panjshir sites, he said to nobody in particular, and get me a satellite pass on that elevation band in the last 72 hours. Holcomb. The satellite imagery came back 18 hours later, and it showed what she had expected it to show, which was the particular thermal signature of a generator running intermittently in a structure that had been cold for 40 years, and 2 vehicle tracks in the frost-hardened ground approaching from the western access route. Someone was at the station. Whether that someone was Nazarov was a question that required more than satellite imagery, and the answer to that question was what generated the planning meeting that happened that afternoon in the same cinder block room with the same flickering light and the same cold coffee. And what made that planning meeting different from the previous one was that nobody looked at her as though she was there to handle equipment. Hale was not in the room. Hale was in the medical tent with his arm in a sling and a look on his face that said he knew exactly what he was missing and was unhappy about it, but he was not cleared for field operations, and the base medic had been unambiguous on that point, which meant that the question of who was going to provide overwatch on an approach to a Soviet-era survey station at 3,200 meters elevation in the Panjshir against a target with a 4 to 6 person security element and a history of burning compromised positions had an answer that nobody had to state explicitly. Reed stated it anyway. Voss takes the overwatch. He said it the way you'd state a logistical fact, not deferentially, not as a suggestion, but as a component of the plan that was simply true and needed to be acknowledged so they could move on to the rest of the architecture. Nobody contradicted him. Cole looked around the room, met eyes briefly, and moved on. Ingress timeline. We have a 72-hour window before his historical pattern says he moves. We need a ground team at the station perimeter within 48 hours to account for early departure. That means we insert tonight. Weather is going to be a factor, Webb said. There's a front moving through the valley tomorrow morning. We'll have wind and possible precipitation at elevation. Insert before the front hits, establish position. Ride it out. And if the front grounds the extract birds, then we wait. Webb digested that with the expression of a man who understood that waiting in a hide at 3,200 meters in an Afghan winter with a storm coming was not an abstract problem, but who also understood that Cole's calculus on risk was not his to revise. What's the ROE on Nazarov? Maya asked. Capture preferred. He's worth more talking than silent. And if capture isn't viable? Cole met her eyes. Use your judgment, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. That's a lot of latitude for a support role. He didn't smile. Yes, he said. It is. Yes. They inserted at 2,200 before the front arrived, dropped by helicopter onto a ridge 6 kilometers from the survey station and left to cover the ground on foot in the dark. 6 people this time. Cole, Webb, Reed, 2 operators she hadn't worked with before named Tillman and Okafor, and her. Not support. Not listed as support. Listed as Staff Sergeant M. Voss, Scout Sniper, which was what her record said she was, and which was what she had been for 4 years, and which she had not felt required to correct anyone about, precisely, but had also not gone out of her way to clarify. The ground was different here than the Kunar Valley. The Panjshir terrain was older feeling, if terrain could feel old, the rock more exposed, the vegetation sparser, the elevation giving everything a stripped quality that the forested ridges of the east didn't have. The frost was real and the footing was inconsistent, alternating between solid rock and patches of ice-hard ground that caught you if you moved too quickly. She kept pace at the middle of the column and watched the terrain. The survey station was on a shelf of exposed rock that jutted from the western face of the ridge like a platform that someone had built deliberately, which, in a sense, it had been. The Soviets had chosen it for line of sight to the valley below, which gave it the same quality that made it useful to anyone who wanted to see a long way from a fixed point. The building itself was a two-story concrete structure, utilitarian and blunt, with a smaller outbuilding attached on the northern side. She had surveyed it in 2019 with a three-person team looking for cache viability. She knew the approach angles, the dead ground, the positions from which you could see the station without being seen from it. She also knew that anyone who had done their homework on the station, anyone serious about using it as a shelter, would know the same things and would have positioned accordingly. That was the variable she kept returning to as they moved. Voss, Cole's voice low on the direct channel. You're thinking. I'm always thinking. You're thinking louder than usual. She considered whether to share it, decided yes. The station's western hide is the obvious overwatch position. Anyone running security on the site is going to have eyes on it. Where do you want to set up? There's a secondary position on the northern approach. It's worse angle on the main structure. I'll have a partial view of the south face and a clear view of the vehicle access route. But it's the position they're less likely to be watching. Worse angle on the target? Yes. How much worse? I lose the north face completely, and I have maybe 60% of the south face. But if their security is positioned where I'd position it, the western hide is a trap. Cole was quiet for a moment, breathing controlled in the cold. Your call, he said. She turned north. They split at the 200-meter mark, Cole taking his element toward the southern approach while she angled north, moving slower now, more deliberately, using the terrain to break her outline against the sky. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees in the last hour, and the wind was picking up from the west, the leading edge of the front starting to come through. She found the northern position, a broken rock formation that gave her a low profile and a sight line to the vehicle track, and settled in. Set up the rifle, ran through the adjustments. Distance to the station's south face, 460 meters. Distance to the vehicle track, 280. Wind at current speed pushing left to right from her perspective at approximately 20 kilometers per hour and increasing. She checked the thermal optics she'd mounted alongside the main scope. The station resolved in green-gray, 2 heat signatures visible on the ground floor, mild, seated or lying down, low activity. A third signature moving on the upper level, moving between what she remembered as 2 windows that faced south, 3 inside. She keyed her radio, whispered, I have 3 thermals inside, ground floor, 2 stationary, upper level, 1 mobile. Cole's voice came back immediately. Copy. We're at the south perimeter. No contacts outside. Their security is inside or they're confident in their position. Which is it? She thought about it. Both, she said. The outside is clean because they think the outside is clean. That means they swept it when they arrived and they're trusting the sweep. How long ago did they arrive? Vehicle tracks show at least 24 hours, maybe more. They've been in there a day and nobody's come, so they stopped looking, Webb said on the net. People get comfortable, Reed said. People get dead, Okafor said, which was the first thing she'd heard him say that wasn't a tactical call. Cole said, We're going to the door in 90 seconds. Voss, I need you on that vehicle track in case they have an exit vehicle we didn't see. On it. Anyone comes through that south door that isn't us, I know. Go. She shifted her primary sight line to the vehicle track and waited. The 90 seconds felt longer than 90 seconds, which was normal. Time in the gap between preparation and action always ran at the wrong speed. She focused on her breathing, on the wind, on the track, on the heat signature of the upper floor figure who had gone still now, which could mean the figure had sat down or could mean the figure had heard something. She keyed her radio. Upper level went stationary, she said. Copy. Could be nothing. Could be, Cole said. Then, moving. She heard nothing. They were good enough that she heard nothing, which was the point, and she stayed on the track and the south face and the door that remained closed and the upper level signature that remained still. Then the south door opened. Not Cole's team. The figure that came through it was moving fast, alone, carrying something. A bag, a hard case, she couldn't tell. And heading not for the vehicle track, but for the open ground to the east, toward the rock field that would give cover in that direction, moving with the particular urgency of someone who has heard something they don't want to find out more about. She ran the number, 310 meters to the figure, moving but not running yet. Cole. Solo exit, south door, moving east, not toward the vehicle. Can you ID? Negative at this light. Engagement status? She tracked the figure, who was moving faster now, had broken into a run, the bag or case swinging at his side. Cole. I need a decision. Stand by. The sound of the door bursting inward reached her on the wind, compressed and flat. Cole's team going through the entrance, and she heard shouting in Dari and then a shot, single, from inside the structure. And then Cole's voice on the net, clipped and hard. Nazarov is not inside. Repeat. Nazarov is not in the building. We have 2 security and 1 communications tech. Nazarov is not here. She already had the running figure in her scope. Cole. I hear you. The figure heading east, I think that's your man. Silence on the net for 2 seconds, which was a long time. Take him down. Non-lethal, if possible. 340 meters now, running hard. The bag was a hard case, she could see it clearly. Laptop or comms equipment, the kind of thing you grab when you run because it's worth more than anything else you own. She led the figure by the margin the speed required, dropped the point of aim, made the wind call, and pressed the trigger. The figure went down in the frost-hardened rock field and did not get up. She was already on the radio. Target down, east of the structure, approximately 340 meters. He's moving, conscious. I took the leg. Copy. Cole's voice, and in it was something she was beginning to recognize. Not relief exactly, more like the controlled release of a tension that had been building since the moment the south door opened. Reed Tillman, East Field, 340. Bring him in. She kept her scope on the figure until Reed's silhouette appeared at the edge of her field of view, moving across the frost toward the man she'd put down. The front hit the ridge 20 minutes later, the wind doubling and the first hard pellets of frozen rain coming in sideways, and she stayed in position while Cole's team secured the structure and Reed and Tillman brought the man in from the field. The man they brought in was Faruk Nazarov. She knew it before Cole confirmed it, because she had studied the photographs in the intelligence package carefully enough that she recognized his face in the green-gray of the thermal optic, and because the hard case he'd been carrying when he ran contained exactly what she'd guessed it would contain: a satellite communications unit and a laptop with encryption software that the SIGINT team at Bagram was going to be very interested in. She broke down the rifle in the howling wind, packed it, and moved to the structure. Inside, out of the weather, Cole was standing over Nazarov, who was seated against the wall with his right leg wrapped and his hands zip-tied, and his face carrying the particular expression of a man doing rapid arithmetic about his remaining options. Cole looked up when she came through the door. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her for a moment with the level, assessing attention he gave to everything, and then he looked back at Nazarov. 2 for 2, Webb said from across the room, not to anyone in particular. Reed, who was pulling off his gloves near the door, glanced at her with the quick, direct look of someone who has recalibrated something. She set her pack down, found a wall to put her back against, and looked at the man on the floor. Nazarov was watching her with the sharp attention of someone cataloging threats in a room, doing the automatic triage that people do when they've been caught and are deciding what comes next. His eyes moved over Cole, over Webb, over Reed, and then they found her, and they stopped. Something in his expression shifted, not fear, something more specific than fear, recognition, almost. The look of a man who has just added a variable to his calculation that he didn't know was there. She looked back at him without expression. Outside, the front had arrived fully now, the wind driving against the concrete walls of the station with a sound like sustained pressure, the temperature dropping fast, the mountain closing around them with the indifference of altitude and weather and everything that didn't care about operations or targets, or the long chain of decisions that had put them all in this particular room on this particular night. She thought about the intercept, 12 words in degraded Dari, above the shepherd's winter line. She thought about the 2019 survey, the 3 approaches, the generator capability, the sight lines. She thought about the 760-meter shot in the Kunar Valley and the shot tonight at 340, and the difference between them, not in execution, but in what they represented. The first had been improvised, a contingency in a burning mission. The second had been planned, had been hers from the beginning. She was still thinking about that difference when Cole came and stood beside her and looked at Nazarov and said quietly to her, "You knew he'd run." Not a question. "I thought he might," she said. "He's been running for 8 months. It becomes the reflex. And you put yourself in the position to catch him when he did." "I put myself in a position that wasn't the obvious one." "Same thing," Cole said. She looked at the wall across the room. "Not always," she said. Cole looked at her with the particular attention he gave things when he was deciding whether to push further. He decided not to. "Get some sleep," he said. "Extract's grounded until the front passes. We've got 6 hours minimum." She found a corner of the room with her pack between her and the wall, and she closed her eyes, and outside the mountain pressed its weather against the concrete, and the wind found every crack and came through it, cold and indifferent and loud. She slept. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't long, and it was exactly what she needed. She woke up before the others. Not because of the noise. The front was still running hard against the station walls, the wind finding the gaps in the concrete and whistling through them at a pitch that had been constant for 4 hours. But because something in her internal clock registered the shift in the storm's character, the way the gusts came slightly less frequently, the way the pressure inside the room changed by a degree that wasn't measurable with instruments but was measurable by someone who had spent enough nights in mountain shelters waiting for weather to break. She sat up, checked her watch. 4:12. Nazarov was on the far wall, zip-tied to a support column, asleep or pretending to be. One of Cole's operators, Tillman, was on watch, sitting near the door with his rifle across his knees and the particular blank-faced alertness of someone running on discipline rather than energy. He glanced at her when she moved. She gave him a small nod, and he returned it and went back to watching the door. She checked her rifle, ran through the functions quietly, more from habit than necessity. The weapon was clean. She'd maintained it before she slept, but the action of checking it was something she'd done every morning for 4 years, and her hands did it without instruction. Cole was awake when she looked across the room. He was sitting with his back against the wall, eyes open, looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man whose brain had not stopped working while his body rested. He did this, she had noticed. He didn't sleep the way other people slept, didn't fully disengage. He went somewhere quieter but stayed accessible, like a system running on low power rather than shut down. He looked at her. "Front's breaking," she said quietly. "Hour? Maybe 2. The gusts are spacing out." He checked his own watch and said nothing, which meant he was revising the extract timeline in his head. "Bagram is going to want Nazarov on a bird by 0800, he said. "We can make that. Weather permitting." "Weather's permitting." He looked at her with the level attention that characterized most of his looks, the ones that were actually assessments rather than acknowledgments. "You sleep?" "Some." "Enough?" "Enough for what's next," she said. He seemed to accept that. He got to his feet without using his hands, which was the kind of physical ease that either came from youth or from so many years of physical conditioning that the body had simply stopped registering complaint. Cole was neither young nor demonstrative about his fitness, which made it more apparent. "Wake Webb at 0430, he said. "I want to be moving by 5. She nodded. He went to check on Nazarov. The extract helicopter came in at 0623, 20 minutes ahead of the revised timeline, and the pilot put it down on the station's vehicle platform with the casual precision of someone who had done this in worse weather and considered this comparatively pleasant. The front had broken fast once it started, the clouds thinning and then separating, the wind dropping from a sustained howl to a manageable crosswind that pushed at them on the open platform but didn't threaten anything. They loaded Nazarov first. He walked with the careful gait of a man managing a leg wound, not dramatically, not performatively, but with the focused attention that pain demands when you don't want it to show more than it already does. Someone had splinted the leg properly during the night, and he'd been given something for the pain from Webb's kit, and he moved without assistance, which told her he was going to be a problem in interrogation, not because he was withholding, but because he was managing. People who managed their physical state under those conditions were people who knew how to manage their mental state under questioning. She filed that for the debrief. The flight back to Bagram took 50 minutes, most of it over terrain she'd been looking at from the ground for 2 days, and which looked entirely different from 500 feet. Smaller, more organized, the chaos of individual ridges and valleys compressed into a coherent pattern that only altitude revealed. Reed was across from her in the hold, looking out his own porthole with the expression of a man who was somewhere between exhaustion and a specific kind of processing that didn't have a name, but that she recognized because she'd done it herself after operations. The internal audit of everything that happened and how it compared to everything you'd thought was going to happen. She let him process. 40 minutes in, he looked at her. Can I ask you something? You can ask. How do you know when to take the shot? He paused, searched for the right framing. Not the technical part. I understand the technical part. I mean, last night, Nazarov running. You had maybe 5 seconds of decision time. How do you know? She thought about it seriously because it was a serious question. You do the work before, she said. You think through every possible version of what might happen before it happens. So when one of the versions shows up, you've already made the decision. You're not deciding in 5 seconds. You decided 3 hours ago when you were planning. What if the version that shows up isn't one you planned for? Then you improvise. But you improvise faster if you've planned a lot of other versions, because your brain knows the shape of the problem even when it doesn't know the specific answer. Reed considered that. That's not how they teach it, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't. He looked out the porthole again. The protein bar thing, he said. I've been thinking about it. You can stop thinking about it. I know, but Reed, it's done. I'm not carrying it. He looked at her. Are you sure? Yes. Because I would be. I know, she said. That's the difference. He thought about that for the rest of the flight. Bagram in the morning had a specific quality that she associated with forward operating environments everywhere. The combination of permanent infrastructure and impermanence, buildings that had been there for years still carrying the feeling of something temporary, people moving with the controlled urgency of a place that was always waiting for the next thing to happen. They processed Nazarov through the intelligence intake at Building 7, and she watched through the window as the SIGINT team went through the hard case with the controlled excitement of people who had been handed something they'd been looking for. The laptop's encryption was a problem that would take time, but the satellite communications unit was immediately productive. It ran on a frequency set that the SIGINT cell had been trying to geolocate for 6 months, and having the physical hardware meant that half that work was done. Colonel Briggs was in the corridor outside the intake room when she came out. He was standing with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting and is not going to acknowledge that he has been waiting, drinking coffee from a paper cup and looking at a tablet in his other hand. He looked up when she came through the door. Voss? Sir? Second confirmed HVT in 4 days, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment. Walk with me. She fell into step beside him. They moved down the corridor and out through a side door into the compound yard, where the morning was cold and clear and the mountains were visible in every direction, white-capped and indifferent. I pulled your record, he said. I was told you would need 2 authorization levels. I have 2 authorization levels. He sipped his coffee. You were at Helmand in 2021, the operation that resulted in the call sign. She said nothing. I read the after action. I didn't write the after action. No, someone else did. Someone who had trouble making the sequence of events fit into a timeline that was physically credible. He glanced at her. The notation in the file says, and I'm quoting, engagement distances and shot sequence are assessed as accurate by 2 independent witnesses. No further explanation is offered because no further explanation is available. That sounds about right, she said. What happened at Helmand? She looked at the mountains. What the after action says happened. The after action is deliberately vague. Yes, sir. Briggs stopped walking. She stopped with him. Voss, I'm not trying to build a case against you. I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at. He turned to face her directly, and there was something in his expression that was less the institutional authority he'd been wearing in the debrief room and more the thing underneath it, a senior officer who had seen a great deal and was genuinely uncertain, which was unusual enough that she paid attention to it. In my career, I have met a number of people who were very good at this, genuinely exceptional. I can count them on one hand. She waited. I would like to know if you're one of them or if you're something else. What's the difference? She said. Exceptional people have limits, he said. I need to know where yours are. She looked at him steadily. So do I, she said. Sir. Briggs looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the mountains, then looked back at his tablet. There's a third tasking, he said. It came through overnight. She felt something in her chest that wasn't quite dread and wasn't quite anticipation, something in between. Sarohi and Nazarov are pieces of a larger architecture, Briggs said. The network's actual command element, the man who built it, is a person we've been trying to locate and identify for 2 years. We have a name now. We have it because of what Nazarov's communications unit gave us in the last 3 hours. He turned the tablet toward her. His name is Rauf Mateen. The photograph on the tablet showed a man in his 50s, trim, dark-eyed, with the quality of stillness in a photograph that suggested the same quality in person. He was sitting at what appeared to be an outdoor table somewhere, cafe maybe, or a courtyard, and he was looking at something outside the frame with an expression of complete composure. Former ISI, Briggs said. Went private approximately 8 years ago. He's been running this network since inception. Sarohi handled logistics, Nazarov handled communications, Mateen handles everything else, targeting, finances, personnel, strategic direction. Where is he? That's the problem. Briggs took the tablet back. We have a location window, not a fixed position, a probable area. A town called Nawabad, 60 kilometers east of here, population 4,000. He has contacts there that go back 20 years, from his ISI days. He's used it as a rest point before. How solid is the location intelligence? Solid enough that the Counterterrorism Task Force has been planning a direct action for the last 6 hours. She looked at him. A direct action in a town of 4,000, she said. Yes. With a target who was ISSI for how long? 12 years. 12 years ISI, 8 years running a network that has survived the capture of 2 of its 3 senior figures. She paused. He knows we're coming. Briggs said nothing. He's had Sarohi for 4 days and Nazarov for less than 12 hours. He doesn't know about Nazarov yet, possibly. But Sarohi's network went dark when we took him. Mateen is not sitting in Nawabad having coffee. The task force assessment disagrees. The task force assessment is built on signals intelligence that Mateen's network generated. If he burned Sarohi's position and he burned the Panjshir site, we don't know he burned those. Sir, she said it evenly. The counter-sniper on the Kunar op wasn't random. That was placed intelligence. Someone told them we were coming. Sarohi's security was sitting on that compound waiting. Briggs was quiet. Mateen burned his own people to test our capabilities, she said. He let us take them to see how we do it, to see what we had. The yard was quiet around them. Somewhere across the compound, a vehicle engine started and idled and drove away. That's a significant assessment, Briggs said. Yes, sir. It's also, if accurate, a significant problem. Yes, sir. Briggs looked at his tablet, then at the mountains, then at her. The task force goes in at 1400, he said. 8 hours from now. Cole's team is attached as a support element. Does Cole know your concerns? Cole and I had a conversation this morning. What was his assessment? Cole's assessment, Briggs said carefully, is that he trusts the people he's been working with. She understood that. What do you need from me? She said. I need you on that operation, Briggs said. Not as support, not hidden in the package, as what you are. He looked at her directly. Because if you're right about Mateen, the task force is walking into something, and the only thing I have that I'm confident about right now is the one person who has been right about everything else. She stood with that for a moment. If I'm right about Mateen, she said, being on the operation doesn't help much. He'll have prepared for what we're going to do. So what would help? She looked at the photograph on the tablet, which Briggs was holding toward her again. The man at the outdoor table, the composure in his expression, the quality of someone who was looking at something outside the frame and was not concerned about what he saw. He needs to see something he isn't expecting, she said. The planning session for the Nawabad operation ran from 0900 to 11:30 in a larger room than the one at Camp Raven Hollow. An actual operations center with live satellite feeds and a proper map table and 4 people from the counterterrorism task force who had been working this target for months and who received Maya's presence at the table with the specific polite hostility of experts being told to consider input from someone outside their field. The task force lead was a man named Captain Decker, 30s, sharp and precise in the manner of someone who had been successful long enough that being questioned had become genuinely novel. He ran through the operation plan with the fluency of someone who had built it and believed in it, and the plan was not bad. It was thorough, well-resourced, multi-element, with blocking positions on the town's 2 main roads and a direct action element going to the target building with air support on standby. The plan assumed Mateen was in the target building. When she said so, Decker looked at her. That's what the plan is built on, yes. What if he isn't? We have SIGINT placing him there in the last 18 hours. You have SIGINT placing a communication device registered to his network in that location in the last 18 hours, she said. That's not the same thing. Decker looked at Cole, who was sitting across the table with his hands flat on the surface, watching. Sergeant Voss, Decker said, I've been building this operation for 72 hours. The intelligence has been assessed by people who weren't looking for the possibility that the intelligence is planted, she said. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone was thinking and nobody expected to be said out loud. Planted, Decker repeated. Mateen was ISI for 12 years. He ran covert operations for a government intelligence service. He knows how SIGINT collection works. He knows what we look for and what we act on. You're suggesting he placed a communication device to draw us in. I'm suggesting it's possible and worth considering before we put 8 operators into a town of 4,000 people based on a device location. Possible and worth considering, Decker said, and his tone had gone to a register that was technically even but wasn't. Based on what? Based on your assessment of his psychology? Based on the pattern of the last 4 days. The last 4 days produced 2 successful HVT captures. Yes. And both of those operations encountered conditions that suggested advanced knowledge of our approach. The Kunar op had a counter-sniper that shouldn't have been there. The Panjshir site had a target who was mid-flight when we arrived. Nazarov was caught. Nazarov was caught because he ran in the wrong direction. She let that sit for a second. That's luck. On our side, not his. Mateen doesn't plan for luck. Decker looked at the map. What's your alternative proposal? He said, and his voice had shifted, not conceding, but listening, which was different, and which she took as the most she was going to get. Go to Nawabad, she said. Run the operation as planned, but assume the target building is a secondary location and plan for Mateen to be watching from somewhere he can see the entire approach. If he's watching, he's gone before we arrive. Not if he doesn't know he's been identified. He's watching to confirm we take his bait. That means he needs to stay long enough to see us go in. Decker looked at her. You want to use the operation as bait, he said. You want to run the entire direct action as a diversion. I want to run the direct action as planned and put a separate element on the observation positions around the town before we move. And what's on the observation positions? She looked at him steadily. Me, she said. Damn. They compromised, which in operational planning usually meant that nobody got exactly what they wanted and everyone was mildly dissatisfied, which was generally preferable to the alternative. Decker ran his operation as designed. She got Cole, Webb, Reed, and a 45-minute head start. They inserted into Nawabad's outskirts at 13:15, moving through the eastern agricultural fringe where the town's edge dissolved into fallow fields and then into rock. The town itself was visible from the high ground east of the main road. Flat-roofed buildings, a few taller structures near the center, the minaret of a mosque, a market area that was operating at reduced capacity on a Tuesday afternoon with the particular subdued quality of a place that was aware something was happening nearby, even if it didn't know exactly what. She set up on the high ground. The view from the eastern ridge gave her 3/4 of the town, the main road approach from the north, and 2 of the 4 potential observation positions she'd identified from the satellite imagery. Elevated positions outside the town perimeter with sight lines to the target building and the approach routes. She began scanning. Task force is at the northern checkpoint, Cole said from 2 meters to her left, where he was watching through his own optic. They're holding as planned. Copy. We have 8 minutes before they move. She didn't answer. She was scanning the observation positions methodically, working from the most obvious to the least, spending 30 seconds on each before moving on. The first 3 were empty, or appeared empty, which was the relevant consideration. The fourth was a rooftop on the western edge of town, partially screened by a water tank and offering a sightline to the target building's front entrance and the main road approach. She'd flagged it as the most viable observation point in the pre-mission analysis. Nothing visible. She moved to the 5th position, a partially collapsed agricultural building at the south end of town, 2 stories, enough remaining structure to provide a platform and concealment. She stopped. There was a figure in the upper floor of the agricultural building, standing back from the window line, which was correct technique, standing in the shadow of the interior rather than the light of the window, which was also correct technique, and holding something, binoculars or a spotting scope, directed not at the target building but at the northern approach road, watching for the task force. Cole. Go. Southern agricultural structure, 2nd floor. I have an observer. A pause. 1 figure. 1 visible. Can you ID? Negative at this range. I need a better angle. She calculated the distance to the agricultural building, 930 meters, which was beyond comfortable and into territory where identification required better conditions than she currently had. I'm going to shift position 20 meters south. Don't move until I call. She picked up the rifle and the tripod and relocated, moving fast and low, finding the new position in a shallow depression that gave her 6 degrees of additional angle toward the agricultural building's upper floor. Settled back in. The figure was still there. Through the higher magnification from the new position, she could see more. The figure was male. She was confident of that. Medium build. The way he stood. The distribution of weight. The particular stillness of someone who was trained to hold a position, not someone who was merely standing, was specific in a way that reduced the population of possible people it could be. She couldn't see his face. Task force is moving in 4 minutes, Cole said. Copy. Voss? I hear you. She needed the figure to move, needed him to shift position enough that the angle gave her the face, and she needed that to happen in less than 4 minutes, because once the task force moved, the situation would change in ways she couldn't fully predict. Reed was 20 meters north of Cole, prone, watching through his own glass. Go. The south road, single vehicle, slow roll. I need him to look south. A pause. We don't have a vehicle. Who's got the keys to the insert truck? A longer pause. Then Webb's voice. That's a significant deviation from the Webb. Operational parameter and Decker is going to be Webb. A silence. I've got the keys, Webb said. South road. Slow. Lights on. Just driving through. If Mateen is in that building, he's going to make us. If Mateen is in that building and he makes a vehicle on the south road, he looks south, she said. That's what I need. Go. She heard the truck's engine start somewhere below and behind her, and 30 seconds later it appeared on the south road. Their insertion vehicle, moving at a pace that was unhurried and directional, just a truck on a road. Nothing specific, nothing alarming. The figure in the agricultural building moved. He turned to look south, and the angle of the turn brought his face out of the shadow and into the gray afternoon light that came through the eastern window, and she had 2 seconds of clear sight picture before he registered something and turned back and stepped away from the window. 2 seconds was enough. She had studied the photograph on Briggs's tablet that morning. The composed man at the outdoor table, the dark eyes, the quality of stillness. Cole. Go. It's Mateen. The net went quiet for the specific duration of a very short, very significant internal conversation. You're certain? Yes. 900 meters in low light, 2 seconds of sight picture. Yes. Another pause. Decker, Cole said, switching to the task force net. Hold your advance. Repeat. Hold advance. We have a possible actual at alternate location. Decker's voice came back with the controlled edge of a man who had been running an operation for 72 hours and did not want to hear what he was hearing. Cole, we are 2 minutes from... Decker, hold. A silence that lasted 3 full seconds, which, in that context, was a very long silence. Holding, Decker said. Voss, Cole said. What do you need? She was already doing the calculation. 930 meters. Wind from the southwest at 15 kilometers per hour. Temperature 8 degrees. Target is mobile, building interior, multiple possible exit routes, and she had one confirmed face ID that would not survive a legal standard, but was as certain as she was going to be on this timeline. ROE, she said. What's my ROE? Capture preferred, Cole said. Lethal authorized if capture isn't viable. Capture isn't viable. He's 900 meters away in a building with multiple exits and his own security. And if we move any element toward that building, he's gone in under 2 minutes. Then what are you asking? I'm asking if I have a green light. The net went quiet. She waited. Mateen was in that building, and he was going to be in that building for approximately as long as it took for him to confirm that the task force was going to his decoy location and start their assault, at which point he would have served his purpose for being there, intelligence confirmation that his decoy had worked, and he would leave. She had, at most, 90 seconds. Cole, she said, I hear you. I need an answer. Another silence, and she understood that Cole was doing what commanders do in the gap between a request and an authorization. He was accounting for everything simultaneously, the ROE, the intelligence value, the strategic significance, the irreversibility, and his own judgment about the person on the other end of the radio and whether that judgment was something he was willing to put in a report. Voss? His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not hesitation. Cole didn't hesitate. Something more careful. Tell me you're certain. She looked through the scope at the agricultural building. The figure had stepped back from the window, but she could see the edge of his silhouette in the interior shadow. He was still there, still watching, still waiting to confirm. I'm certain, she said. Then you have a green light, Cole said. Your call, your shot. She made the wind calculation, adjusted the elevation, ran the hold. The figure moved back toward the window, checking the north road, checking to see if Decker's element had moved yet, which meant she had the second she needed. She pressed the trigger. The MRAD fired. Downrange, 930 meters away, the figure in the upper floor of the agricultural building dropped away from the window. She stayed on the scope. Impact, she said. Cole said nothing for a moment. Confirm, he said finally. Figure is down. I don't have a second visual. Reed, Tillman, South Agricultural Structure now. Webb with them. His voice was controlled, issuing the order with the economy of someone clearing the board. Decker, hold your position. Do not approach the target building until I give you an all clear. She kept her scope on the agricultural building. Webb's team appeared at the building's lower entrance 90 seconds after Cole's order, stacking on the door with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before, Reed on the left, Tillman on the right, Webb making the call. They went through. She waited. The radio was quiet for 45 seconds, which was longer than the building's interior size should have required, and she felt the specific discomfort of that gap, the space where confirmation should have come and didn't yet. Then Webb's voice. We have 1 KIA, upper floor. A pause. Cole, we need you to come look at this. Is it Mateen? A longer pause. Come look at this, Webb said again. Cole got to his feet and looked at her. She was already breaking down the rifle. They moved together down off the ridge toward the agricultural building, and she kept her expression clear and her pace steady. And inside her chest, the question that Webb hadn't answered was doing what unanswered questions do. The building's interior smelled of dust and cold stone and something chemical, a residue she couldn't immediately place. They went up the stairs, which were wooden and protested under weight, and into the upper floor where the light came in gray and flat through 2 windows, and Webb was standing near the body with an expression she read as not good before she saw what he was looking at. The figure on the floor was dead. The figure on the floor was not Raouf Mateen. He was younger by 15 years, darker, with a build that didn't match the photograph, and he was wearing a jacket that had been chosen to read from a distance as a specific silhouette. And next to his body on the floor was a spotting scope and a radio handset and a folded piece of paper that Reed was already opening. She looked at it. The paper was blank except for 3 words, written in careful English by someone who knew exactly who would find it. I see you. The room was very quiet. She looked at the words on the paper for a long moment, and then she looked at the window where the decoy had been standing, and then she looked at the north road where Decker's task force was still holding, and she ran the calculation backward. The one she should have run forward before she pressed the trigger. Mateen hadn't been watching to confirm the decoy had worked. Mateen had been watching to confirm she was there. He made us, Webb said. Not a question. He made me, she said. The room absorbed that distinction. Reed looked at her with something in his face that wasn't accusation. He wasn't capable of that in this moment, but was the particular helpless expression of someone watching a situation get more complicated in a way they don't have the tools to address. Cole came and stood beside her and looked at the paper. He knew about Iron Wolf, Cole said. Yes. How long? She thought about the counter-sniper on the Kunar Ridge, the carefully placed position, the burned intelligence on the Panjshir site, the decoy that had been designed not just to draw the task force in, but to draw her out, specifically, into an identification action at extreme range that would confirm not just her presence, but her capabilities. She thought about the man at the outdoor table in the photograph, the composed eyes, the quality of looking at something outside the frame. He'd been looking at her. Since the beginning, she said. Since Kunar. Cole looked at her. He ran the whole thing, she said. Sarohi, Nazarov. He let us take them. To get us here. To get me here. Why? She looked at the paper again. Because he wanted to know if I was real, she said. And now he knows. Outside, the afternoon light was going gray over Nawabad, and somewhere in the 4,000 people of that town, or in the roads leading away from it, or in the mountains beyond, Raouf Mateen was moving, patient, informed, and now certain of exactly what he was dealing with. Cole stood with that for a long moment. Then he picked up his radio. Decker, stand down the operation. The target is not in Nawabad. A pause, during which Decker's response was audible as sound if not as words. Because he was never here. He used the location to run an assessment. Another pause. Yes, I'll explain at debrief. He put the radio down. He looked at Maya. She was still looking at the paper on the floor. I see you. Voss, Cole said. Sir? This changes things. Yes, she said. It does. She picked up the paper, folded it, and put it in her chest pocket. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do with it, but she knew that she was going to look at it again, and that when she looked at it, she was going to think about what it meant to be seen by someone like Mateen. What it meant that he had spent 4 days and 2 of his own senior people to confirm she existed. It meant she was a problem he had decided to solve. It also meant he'd underestimated how long solving her would take. She picked up her pack and walked out of the building into the gray afternoon, and the paper in her chest pocket was small and light and said everything that needed to be said about what came next. The drive back to Bagram took 2 hours on roads that couldn't decide whether they were paved or weren't, and she spent most of it in the rear seat of the second vehicle, with her pack between her feet and her eyes on the window and the paper in her chest pocket pressing against her sternum through the fabric like something with more physical weight than it had. Webb drove. Reed was in the passenger seat. Neither of them talked for the first 40 minutes, which was fine because she didn't want to talk and they seemed to understand that, or at least to understand that the interior of the vehicle wasn't the right place for whatever conversation was going to happen eventually. The mountains moved past the window in the way mountains move when you're going fast on a bad road, lurching, discontinuous, offering angles that disappeared before you could read them. She thought about the decoy in the agricultural building, the jacket chosen to read as a specific silhouette at distance. Someone had worn that jacket, knowing what it meant, knowing that the purpose of wearing it was to draw fire, And whoever had given that order had done so with the confidence that the fire would come from a specific direction and a specific person and would be good enough to connect at 900 meters in gray afternoon light. Mateen had known she'd take the shot. He'd known she could make it. He'd built the entire sequence, Kunar, Panjshir, Nawabad, as a progressive capability assessment, and she had cooperated with every stage of it with the professionalism of someone who didn't yet understand they were being studied. That was the part that sat in her chest alongside the paper. Not the miss. She hadn't missed, technically. She'd hit exactly what she'd aimed at. The miss was in the identification, in the 2-second sight picture she'd been certain about, the certainty she'd built a green light request on, the certainty Cole had taken on her word and authorized a lethal shot. She had been certain. She had been wrong. Reed turned around in the passenger seat at the 50-minute mark, which told her he'd been deciding whether to turn around for at least 20 minutes. "You couldn't have known," he said. She looked at him. The jacket, the silhouette, the position. He designed it to fool Reed. Someone specifically. He designed it to fool you specifically. That's not a failure of Reed. She said it without heat. "I know what it was. I'm not asking for the debrief version." He turned back around. Webb's eyes found her in the rearview mirror for a moment, then returned to the road. "For what it's worth," Webb said, "I've been running direct action for 9 years. I've never seen someone run a 4-day deception operation to assess a single operator's capabilities. That's not normal. That's not something that happens to normal people. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Webb said. "It's supposed to give you accurate context. Feel however you want about it." She almost appreciated that. "He's going to come at her again," Reed said to the windshield. "Not really to Webb, not really to anyone." "Yes," she said. "He will." On Chet. The Bagram debrief started at 1900 and the room was more crowded than any previous debrief had been, which told her something about how Nawabad had landed in the chain of command. Briggs was there. Cole was there. Decker was there with 2 members of his task force planning staff, and there was a 4th person she hadn't seen before, a civilian, 50s, in the kind of nondescript clothing that people wore when they wanted to communicate that they were not in uniform without communicating anything else. He sat against the wall and didn't introduce himself, and nobody introduced him. She sat at the table. Decker went first, which was his right as the operation lead, and his account of the Nawabad operation was accurate and controlled and completely omitted any acknowledgement that his task force intelligence assessment had produced a decoy location, which she noted and filed. Then Cole gave his account. Then she gave hers. When she finished, the room was quiet in the specific way of a room where everyone is doing arithmetic and nobody wants to be the first to publish their answer. Briggs said, "You were certain of the identification." "Yes, sir." "Based on 2 seconds of sight picture at 930 meters. "Yes, sir." "And the identification was incorrect." "The target was not Mateen, yes." "How is that possible?" Decker said. She looked at him. The jacket matched the photograph's silhouette profile. The build was close at distance. The behavioral pattern, the way he stood, the way he moved, had been coached to match what someone who'd studied Mateen's mannerisms would expect to see. She paused. "Mateen provided the coaching. He knew what I was looking for because he'd been watching me look." "You're telling me this man studied your identification methodology," Decker said. "I'm telling you this man spent 4 days running a deception operation that used 2 of his own senior operatives as bait to determine exactly how I work." "Yes." Decker looked at his folder. "The decoy knew he was going to draw fire," Cole said, not as a question. "There's no other explanation for the jacket," she said. "Someone chose that jacket deliberately. Someone knew what it needed to look like from the East Ridge at that range. Which means Mateen had someone who understood long-range identification parameters," the civilian against the wall said. Everyone looked at him. He didn't look up from whatever he was writing. "Former ISI would have that resource. Not common, but not unavailable." "Who are you?" Decker asked. "I'm the person who's been looking for Rauf Mateen for 22 months, the civilian said. "So I'd appreciate it if we focused on what we learned today rather than what we didn't accomplish." Decker absorbed that with the expression of a man choosing his battles. "What did we learn?" Briggs said, and the question was directed at the room, but landed on Maya. She had been thinking about this for 2 hours in the back of a vehicle on a bad road. We learned that he's not running, she said. He let us take Saroi. He let us take Nazarov. He built the Nawabad sequence. He's not trying to disappear. He's trying to understand the threat before he addresses it. Addresses it how? Briggs said. He didn't build this operation to collect information and then relocate, she said. The note means something. I see you is not a man saying goodbye. It's a man saying this isn't finished. The room was quiet. He's going to come after Iron Wolf, Cole said. He's already coming after Iron Wolf, she said. The question is whether we let him set the terms. The civilian looked up from his notes for the first time. What are the terms you'd prefer? He said. She looked at him. I want to know everything you have on Mateen, she said. 22 months of file. Everything. That file is classified at... I know what level it's at. I'm asking you to authorize the access. The civilian held her gaze for a moment. He had the specific quality of someone who had been in rooms like this for a long time and had learned not to show what the room was doing to him, but she could read the calculation running behind his eyes. Why? He said. Because he's been studying me for 4 days and I've been studying him for about 6 hours. And that's an information imbalance I'd like to correct, she said. He knew what I was going to do before I did it. I need to know what he's going to do before he does it. And you think the file gives you that? I think 22 months of behavioral data gives me a pattern, and patterns are predictive. The civilian looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at Cole. Cole was looking at the table. Give her the file, Briggs said. Maud. She read for 6 hours straight, alone in a room with a locked door and a printed copy of the Mateen file that ran to 240 pages and which she went through with the systematic attention she gave to terrain analysis. Not reading for narrative, but reading for structure, for the recurring shapes that indicated habit, preference, the parts of a person that repeated themselves even when the person believed they were varying. Raouf Mateen, born 1971 in Peshawar. Third son of a civil servant. Educated at a military academy, recruited by ISY at 23. Spent 12 years in covert operations, primarily focused on Afghanistan, with rotations through the Gulf and 2 documented visits to Eastern Europe under assumed identities. Went dark in 2016, surfaced 18 months later with what the file's author described as a significantly upgraded resource profile and an operational methodology that does not resemble ISI standard practice. The file was good. Whoever had been building it for 22 months was methodical and honest about uncertainty. The sections that were inference were marked as inference, the sections that were confirmed were sourced, and the gaps were acknowledged as gaps rather than papered over with assessment language. The gaps were significant. The confirmed sections told her what he'd done. The gaps were where he lived. She read the behavioral section 3 times. Mateen did not improvise tactically. Every operation attributed to him showed extended preparation and multiple contingency layers, the signature of someone who was uncomfortable with variables he hadn't accounted for. He was, by the file's assessment, a control operator, someone who needed to understand the parameters before committing. That was the pattern. That was also the vulnerability. She turned to the section on his known contacts and read until she found what she was looking for, a name that appeared twice in the confirmed section and 3 times in the inference section, each time in a context that suggested a relationship that predated the network and survived its operational changes. A man named Tariq Haidari, former ISSI logistics officer, now privately contracted, based in Jalalabad. The file assessed him as a support resource, someone Mateen used for equipment and safe house access without bringing into operational planning. The kind of person you trusted precisely because you kept them outside the architecture. The kind of person who, if he knew you were coming, would tell you. She pulled the paper from her chest pocket and looked at it. I see you. She thought about what it meant to be seen, about what Mateen had confirmed about her over 4 days, about what he would do with that confirmation. Control operators neutralized threats they understood. They didn't leave them operational if they had the means to address them, because unaddressed threats were variables, and variables were what control operators couldn't tolerate. He wasn't going to run from her. He was going to remove her. She needed to be somewhere he didn't expect when he tried. She wrote a single page of notes, folded it, and knocked on the door. The meeting with Briggs at 200 was brief because she needed it to be brief, and because Briggs, to his credit, was capable of receiving information quickly and acting on it without requiring it to be repeated. She laid out the logic in 10 minutes. The behavioral pattern, the Haidari connection, the inference chain that ran from control operator to specific threat response. Briggs listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me Mateen is going to mount an operation against you personally," he said, "against Iron Wolf. He may not have a name, but he has a call sign and a capability profile, and he knows I'm operating out of this region. And your proposal is to use that. My proposal is to reach Haidari before Mateen does. Haidari is the supply line. If Mateen is planning an operation against a specific target in this region, Haidari's been contacted. And Haidari gives us Mateen's approach. Or Mateen's location. Either one." Briggs looked at her. "You want to use yourself as the bait this time," he said. "I want to position myself so that when he moves, I know where he's moving from." "That's the same thing." "With better information," she said. "You got burned at Nawabad," he said, and he said it without cruelty, just as a fact that was relevant. "He made you. He knows your methodology." "Yes." "And you still want to put yourself in the position where he's coming at you." "I'm already in that position," she said. "The only question is whether I know it's coming." Briggs put his hands flat on the desk. "Cole," he said, to the empty room, which meant he was going to bring Cole into it. "Yes, sir," she said, "and you tell him everything, not the version that gets him to agree. Everything. Yes, sir. Because if this goes wrong, Voss, if this goes the way Nawabad went—" "It won't," she said. "You were certain at Nawabad." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "That's why it won't." Cole's reaction to the full picture was not what she expected, and she had expected several versions of it. He listened to everything: the behavioral analysis, the Haidari inference, the proposal. Without speaking, sitting in the same chair in the same operations room with the same flat hands on the same table, and when she finished, he was quiet for a time that was long enough to be deliberate. "You think he's been planning to come after you since Kunar," he said. "I think he started planning it after Kunar and confirmed the necessity at Nawabad." "Which means the timeline is compressed." "Yes." "How compressed?" "Days," she said. "Not weeks. He has Sarohai and Nazarov in custody, and his network's communications architecture is compromised. Every day he waits, his operational capacity degrades. He needs to move soon, or he's moving with diminished resources." Cole nodded slowly. "Haidari is in Jalalabad," he said. "Yes." "We'd need to reach him before Mateen contacts him, or immediately after, close enough that the information is still current." "Yes." "And you want to go to Jalalabad?" "I think I need to." Cole looked at her in the way he looked at things when he was deciding whether to say the thing he was actually thinking or the version of it that fit the operational context. He decided on the actual thing. "You're not doing this because it's the optimal tactical approach," he said. "You're doing this because you're angry." She didn't answer immediately. "I'm doing this because it's the right move," she said. "The fact that I'm also angry doesn't make it the wrong move. It makes you less reliable." "Then watch me and pull me out if you see it." He held her gaze. "You'd let me do that?" "Yes." "Even if you disagree with the call?" "Yes." He considered that. "Okay," he said, "but we do this correctly. We find Haidari first, we assess the intelligence before we act on it, and nobody takes a shot based on a 2-second sight picture." She felt the weight of that settle on her. "Agreed," she said. "I mean it, Voss. I know." "He made you doubt yourself at Nawabad. That was the point. He wanted you uncertain. Don't hand it to him." She looked at the table. "I'm not uncertain," she said. "I know exactly what I did wrong. I identified a target on insufficient confirmation because the clock was running and I trusted myself past the point where trust was warranted. And now? And now I know the clock is one of his tools," she said. "I won't let it run me again." Cole was quiet for a moment. "There's something else," he said. The way he said it changed the quality of the room slightly. "Briggs talked to SOCOM this morning," he said, "about you. about the last 4 days. And? There are people who want to read you in permanently, full integration with the task force, official designation, the whole architecture. And? And there are people who want to pull you out, rotate you back stateside. The Nawabad outcome, the civilian kill, even though the civilian was a knowing participant. There are people who see that as a liability. She absorbed that. Which people? Decker's people, primarily. What does Briggs want? Briggs wants to let the next 48 hours decide, Cole said, which is either him trusting you or him covering himself. Probably both. What do you want? She said. He looked at her. I want to finish this, he said. Mateen built something. We've taken it apart piece by piece, and he's still out there. And he's got your name, your call sign, in his head as the primary threat to whatever comes next. That doesn't end cleanly until it ends. No, she said. It doesn't. Jalalabad, he said. Tomorrow morning. Small element. You, me, Webb. Reed stays here. Reed's going to argue. Reed can argue with Webb. Reed found her at 2,300, which she had expected because Reed had developed a habit of finding her when he'd been told something he didn't like, as though her position on a decision was a separate data point from Cole's that he needed to collect before he could fully process his response to it. He found her at the range, which was empty at that hour, running dry fire drills in the dark, with the rifle unloaded and her body going through the sequence from position to trigger press to follow through, building the repetition that corrected the thing that had gone wrong at Nawabad, not the identification, which was a judgment error she wasn't going to fix with dry fire, but the trigger press, which in the moment of decision had been fractionally rushed, a barely perceptible compression of the final stage that anyone reviewing the shot would have called clean, but which she knew from the inside had been pushed. She heard him come in. Cole told me, he said. I know. I want to go. I know that too. So why, Because you're still learning to manage what happened at Kunar, she said, and Jalalabad is not the place to manage it. He was quiet. What does that mean? He said. She set the rifle down and looked at him. He was standing at the range entrance with his arms at his sides and his face doing the thing it did when he was holding something together by not looking at it directly. You've been running on the energy of the last 4 days, she said. The contact at Kunar, the Panjshir Op, Nawabad, you've been burning through it and it's kept you functional. But Jalalabad is going to require something different. It's going to require sitting still and being patient and not having an outlet for what you're carrying. I can do that. Maybe, she said, but Cole doesn't want to find out in Jalalabad. Reed looked at the ground. Is that his reason or yours? He said. Does it matter? Yes, he said. It matters to me. She thought about it honestly. Mine, she said. Cole would have taken you. I told him not to. Reed looked up. Why? She picked up the rifle. Because you're good, she said. You're better than you were 4 days ago, which means the trajectory is right. I don't want to interrupt the trajectory by putting you in a situation where you do something that sets you back. That's not your call, he said, and there was some heat in it, the first real heat she'd heard from him, which told her the energy she'd identified was closer to the surface than she'd thought. No, she agreed. It isn't. Cole's is. And Cole deferred to me. Because you're Iron Wolf, he said, and the way he said it was complicated. Not dismissive, not resentful exactly, but carrying the weight of a word that had become something in the last 4 days and was still being processed. Because I asked him to, she said. He stood with that. Will you tell me how it goes? He said finally. Yes. Actually tell me, not the debrief version. Yes. He nodded once, the short, decisive nod of someone closing a door on something they're not finished with but have decided to set aside. Don't get shot, he said. I'll try. He left. She went back to the dry fire sequence, working through it in the dark until the motion was right again from the inside. Not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect from the inside, but correct in the way that mattered, the way that held under pressure. Chup. They reached Jalalabad at 1100 the next morning, moving in a civilian vehicle without identifying markings through a city that was always doing several things simultaneously. commerce, argument, construction, the constant motion of a place that didn't pause for anything as abstract as political context. Haidari's location had come from a source Webb had developed on a previous rotation, a contact inside Jalalabad's logistics community who tracked movement of people and materials through the region with the particular attentiveness of someone who found information valuable regardless of who was asking. The source had provided an address and a window. Haidari was, as of that morning, at a hardware supply business in the city's eastern commercial district that he part-owned through a family arrangement. The store was the kind of place that sold everything from plumbing fittings to agricultural supplies, with the organized chaos of a business that had been absorbing inventory longer than it had been organizing it. It smelled of metal and sawdust and the particular dusty warmth of enclosed spaces heated by foot traffic, rather than anything mechanical. Haidari was at the rear counter. He was 60, which was older than the file photograph, and had put on weight in the way of men who had spent years in physical work, and had recently reduced it, and he was writing something in a ledger with the concentration of someone for whom numbers were a language he still had to work at. He looked up when they came in. He saw Cole first, then Webb, then Maya, and the look that moved across his face when he saw her was brief and specific, and told her the things she'd come to find out. He knew her call sign. He'd been told to expect someone matching a description, which meant Mateen had already contacted him, which meant the timeline was as compressed as she'd assessed. She crossed the store without hurrying and put both hands on the counter and looked at him. "You know who I am," she said. Haidari's expression went through several things in quick succession before landing on a careful neutrality. "I don't know what you mean," he said, in English that was accented but precise. "Yes, you do. You looked at me the way someone looks when they've been given a description. Many people come into my store. When did Mateen contact you?" The name moved across Haidari's face like something physical. "I don't know that name," he said. "Tariq." She said the first name and watched what it did. "He contacted you about a job, movement of personnel or equipment. He gave you parameters for what he needed." Haidari was looking at the ledger. "I'm a businessman," he said. "I sell hardware." "You also run safe house logistics for a network that we've been taking apart for 2 weeks," she said. "We have Sarohi. We have Nazarov. We have Nazarov's communications unit, which has your name in the contact registry 3 times. Haidari's hands, still on the ledger, tightened slightly. "That contact is finished," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "That's not what I'm here about." He looked up. "Mateen called you," she said. "Recently. Within the last 2 days. He asked you for something specific. I need to know what." "If I tell you that, I know what happens if you tell me," she said. "I also know what happens if you don't and we find out anyway, which we will. One of those outcomes is worse for you." Haidari looked at Cole, who was standing to her left and slightly back, and at Webb, who was at the door with the specific relaxed posture of someone who was not relaxed. He looked back at her. "He asked for a vehicle," Haidari said, "and a route." "Where to?" "North, toward the Kunar Valley." She felt something settle in her chest. Not relief. The opposite of relief. The particular cold clarity of a thing confirmed. "He's going back to where it started," Cole said from behind her. "Yes," she said. "When?" she asked Haidari. "He said within 3 days." "Did he tell you what he needed the vehicle for?" Haidari was quiet. "Tariq," she said. "He said he had something to finish," Haidari said. "He said it was personal." She looked at the man behind the counter, the ledger, the weight of a life that had accrued obligations through proximity to things that he'd probably told himself were not his business, the way people tell themselves things when the alternative is admitting that the business was theirs all along. "Go to your sister's place in Peshawar," she said. "Take your family. Don't be in Jalalabad for the next week." Haidari looked at her. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you answered the question," she said. "That's worth something." She stepped back from the counter. Cole was already moving to the door. Outside in the vehicle, she sat with the information arranged in her mind. The Kunar Valley, 3 days, personal. And she ran through what it meant with the same systematic attention she gave to terrain analysis, looking for the structure inside it, the shape of what was coming. Mateen was going back to the valley where he'd first deployed a counter-sniper against an Iron Wolf position. He wasn't running the network anymore. He was coming with something specific in mind, and the something specific had her call sign on it. "He's not trying to rebuild," Webb said from the driver's seat. "He's not trying to salvage the operation." "No," she said. "He's coming for you," Cole said. "Yes." "Which means we go back to Kunar." She looked at the city moving past the window. Jalalabad at midday, indifferent and loud and continuous, the kind of place that had seen enough history that one more set of people with serious intentions moved through it without leaving a mark. "We go back to Kunar," she said. "But we go on my terms." "What does that look like?" She thought about the man in the file photograph, the composed eyes, the outdoor table, the quality of looking at something outside the frame without concern. She thought about what it took to concern someone like that. "It looks like giving him exactly what he's expecting," she said, "right up until the moment I don't." Cole looked at her in the rearview mirror. "That's the whole plan?" "The rest is detail," she said. "I generally like a little more detail in my plans." "I know," she said. "Give me tonight." He held her eyes in the mirror for a moment, then looked back at the road. "You've got tonight," he said. The vehicle moved through Jalalabad and out the other side toward the highway north, and the mountains came back into view ahead of them. The same mountains, always the same mountains, patient and enormous and carrying no opinion about what was going to happen in the Kunar Valley in 3 days. She opened her notebook. She began to write. She wrote for 3 hours that night. Not the plan itself. The plan was architecture, and architecture required more than a notebook page, but the logic underneath it, the structural reasoning that would either hold when pressure was applied or wouldn't, and she needed to know which before she committed anyone else to it. The notebook filled with shorthand, terrain notations, timing windows, the behavioral patterns from Mateen's file cross-referenced against the geography of the Kunar Valley, the specific ridgelines and approach corridors she'd memorized during the first operation and which now carried a different weight because she was looking at them from the other direction, from the perspective of someone who needed to be found in order to finish what was starting. The core of the plan was simple. Mateen was coming to the Kunar Valley because that was where Iron Wolf had first appeared, which meant it held significance for him beyond the tactical. It was the location of the first data point, the place where the assessment had begun. Control operators returned to origins when they wanted to close loops. She was counting on that. She was also counting on him being good enough to expect a trap. That was the part she worked on longest, not how to set the trap, but how to make the trap look exactly like what it was, so that Mateen, who would expect a trap, would look at it and see a trap and then look harder and find what she had left underneath it for him to find, which was a second layer that was real but looked like a second layer of deception, because the move against someone who planned for traps within traps was to make the outermost layer true. She went to sleep at 1:30 with the notebook closed on the floor beside her. She woke up at 4:30 certain it would work, and uncertain whether certain was the right thing to be, and those two things coexisted uncomfortably while she dressed and made coffee from the packet in her kit and drank it standing up, looking at the notebook on the floor. The certainty came from the logic. The uncertainty came from Nawabad. She picked up the notebook and went to find Cole. He was already awake, which she had expected, and he listened to the plan the way he listened to everything, completely and without reaction until it was finished. When she finished, he was quiet for what she had learned to recognize as his genuine processing silence, distinct from his tactical silence and his command silence, each of which had different qualities she'd cataloged over the last week without intending to. "You're going to be in an exposed position," he said. "Yes?" "A position he can find. A position I'll make findable, selectively." "Walk me through the selective part." She did. He listened. "The second layer," he said when she finished. "You're banking on him being smart enough to look for it." "I'm banking on him being exactly as smart as he's shown himself to be. No more." "And if he's smarter?" "Then the plan fails, and we're in a straight engagement at distance, and I back myself in that situation." "After Nawabad." "Because of Nawabad," she said. "I know exactly what I did wrong. That's not nothing." Cole looked at the wall. I need Webb and Okafor on the support element, she said, and I need them in position 6 hours before me. If Mateen's advance team is in the valley before I arrive, I need eyes on them before I move. And what do I do? She looked at him. You coordinate, she said, and you make the call if the situation changes in a way I can't account for from the position. You're giving me the abort authority. Yes. You sure about that? You told me to let you pull me if you see it, she said. I said yes. I meant it. Cole was quiet. Okay, he said. Brief Webb at 0600. We move at 08. He picked up his coffee. Voss. She stopped. What you said last night. About Nawabad. About knowing what you did wrong. Yes. That's harder to say than people think, he said. Most operators never get there. They find an explanation that protects the certainty, and they keep it. She didn't say anything. I'm not saying that to make you feel better, he said. I know, she said. You don't do that. No, he agreed. I don't. The Kunar Valley received them the same way it had the first time, indifferently, its scale making their presence feel like a minor annotation to something much larger and longer in duration. The same ridgelines, the same cold, the same sky that went from black to gray to the hard, clear blue of altitude, with the mechanical reliability of something that had been doing this for a long time before any of them arrived. Webb and Okafor inserted first, moving to the observation positions she'd specified. The northern ridgeline that covered the valley's primary approach corridors, and the elevated position southeast that gave line of sight to the eastern ridge, where the first counter-sniper had been positioned. They went in quiet and early and confirmed their positions by 1,000 with the clipped radio traffic of people who had done this enough times that establishing a hide in Afghan mountain terrain was logistical rather than dramatic. Northern ridge set, Webb said. Southeast set, Okafor said. Copy both, Cole said from his own position, a command and coordination point on the western approach that gave him radio line of sight to everyone and physical line of sight to 2 of the 3 positions. Voss, you're clear to move. She had been waiting 200 meters back in a shallow draw that concealed the vehicle and gave her a final check position before she committed to the approach. She ran through the rifle once more. Function check, scope settings, the notebook's pre-calculated holds for the valley's principal distances, and then she did something she didn't always do before an operation, which was to sit still for 30 seconds and do nothing. Not meditation, not ritual, just the deliberate act of not moving, of letting the noise of preparation and calculation go quiet long enough to hear if anything underneath it was wrong. Nothing was wrong. She moved. The position she'd chosen was on the eastern ridge, not the same spot where the first counter-sniper had been, but the ridge itself, the same ground. She'd chosen it partly for the sightlines it offered across the valley, and partly for what it communicated, the message embedded in the choice of location that a man who had studied the sequence of events as carefully as Mateen had would read immediately. She was going back to where it started. So was he. The position was a natural rock formation 40 meters below the ridge crest, offering cover on 3 sides and a clear sightline across the valley to the western approach, and the compound site, and the northern ridge where Webb was established. She settled in, built the position, and waited. Waiting was most of the job. People who hadn't done it didn't understand that, assumed the difficult part was the shooting, which was technically complex but brief. The difficult part was the hours in between, managing the body's needs without compromising the position, managing the mind's tendency to generate noise in the absence of input, staying present in a way that was alert without being exhausting. She had learned to do this over 4 years, and she was good at it, and it was still hard. She thought about Reed back at Bagram, who was probably doing something physical to manage the energy of being left behind. She thought about Hale, who by now was somewhere in a rehabilitation program learning the particular frustration of a body that wasn't doing what it used to do. She thought about Briggs and his 48-hour window that was now most of the way elapsed, and the decision that was waiting on the other side of it about what happened to Iron Wolf next. She thought about the paper in her chest pocket. I see you. At 1340, Webb's voice came through the earpiece. Movement, northern approach, single vehicle, civilian type. Moving slow. How many occupants? Can't confirm from here. Windows are tinted. Copy. Hold position. Cole's voice. I have the vehicle. It's stopping at the junction. The junction was a point where the northern approach road met a secondary track that ran east toward the valley floor. A natural decision point, the kind of place you'd stop to confirm your position or check for surveillance before committing to a route. Driver is out, Cole said. He's looking at the terrain. She waited. Back in the vehicle, Cole said, turning east. East meant the valley floor. East meant the approach to the ridge. He's coming toward me, she said. Oh, copy. I need you all to hold. Whatever you see, hold until I call. Cole. Hold. A pause. Holding. The vehicle appeared at the valley floor 20 minutes later, moving without urgency along the track that ran parallel to the dry stream bed. It stopped 400 meters from the base of the eastern ridge. One figure got out. She put the scope on him and held. The figure was moving toward the ridge on foot, which meant he'd left whoever was driving in the vehicle, which meant he was either alone or he was the advance, the first one in, to confirm before he brought anyone else. He moved well. Not running, not hurrying, but with the deliberate economy of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had thought about how to get there. He used the available cover without making a production of it, which was the sign of training that had become habit rather than training that was still being performed. He reached the base of the ridge and began to climb. She tracked him through the scope and felt the specific quality of stillness that was not calm, not exactly, but the absence of everything that wasn't relevant. All the noise of the last week compressed down to this: the figure on the slope, the crosshairs, the wind at 11 kilometers per hour from the northwest, the distance decreasing as he climbed. At 280 meters, he stopped. He had found a position, a shelf of rock similar to hers but lower on the ridge, with a different sight line, and he went to one knee and raised binoculars and began to scan the valley. Scanning for her. She held absolutely still. He scanned for 4 minutes, which was thorough, and then he lowered the binoculars and did something she hadn't anticipated. He sat down. Not in a hide position, not in cover. He sat on the rock shelf with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose, and he looked at the valley. She kept her crosshairs on him. After 2 minutes, he spoke. She heard it through the thin mountain air, faintly, carried on the wind that was moving from him toward her. Not words, just sound. A voice carrying at a conversational level in a place where she was the only other person who could hear it. She looked at the figure's posture, the way he sat, the quality of his stillness, which was different from the controlled stillness of someone managing a hide. It was the stillness of someone who had decided something. She keyed her radio. Cole, the figure at 280 on the eastern ridge. I need an ID asset. Do you have eyes on his face from your position? Negative. He's angled away. Okafor, southeast. What do you have? Okafor's voice careful. Partial profile. I can't confirm. She took her eye from the scope for 1 second, just one, and looked at the valley with her naked eye, at the figure on the rock shelf, at the proportions and the posture and the way the light fell across the shape of the man sitting there. She put her eye back to the scope. She thought about what a control operator did when his operation was finished, when his network was dismantled, when his 2 senior people were in custody, when the intelligence architecture he'd built over years was in the hands of people who were going to spend months pulling it apart. What Mateen had done was spend 4 days assessing the threat that had ended his network, and then he'd come back to where it started. Not with a team, not with a plan of attack. He'd come back alone. Cole, she said, go. I'm going to do something you're not going to like. A pause. Voss, I'm going to make contact. The silence on the net had a very specific texture. Define contact, Cole said. I'm going to go down there. That is absolutely not. He came alone, Cole. He's sitting on an open rock shelf in the middle of a valley where he has to know I have a position. He's not attacking. He's not running a counter sniper. He's sitting. Or he's waiting for you to break cover so his element can... I've had eyes on the vehicle since he left it. Nobody else has moved. Webb, confirm. Confirmed, Webb said. Vehicle is stationary, no movement. Coal. Another silence. If this goes wrong, if it goes wrong, I'm 280 meters from a man at altitude, and you have 3 elements with eyes on the position. The math is fine. The math is not fine, Voss. The math is fine, she said. Trust me. The longest silence yet. I'm watching, he said. The second anything changes, you'll know before I do. She came out from behind the rock formation with her rifle slung and her hands visible at her sides, and she walked down the slope toward the shelf where the figure was sitting. He heard her at about 50 meters. The binoculars came up. Not at the valley, at her. And then lowered, and he watched her come down the last 50 meters without moving from the rock. When she reached the shelf, she stopped 10 feet from him. Rauf Mateen was smaller in person than his file photograph suggested. That happens sometimes. The compression of a photograph combined with the quality of attention he projected made him read as physically large. But in person, he was average height and lean in the way of men who had spent years in demanding conditions and whose bodies had simply removed everything that wasn't necessary. His face was composed in exactly the way it had been in the photograph. The dark eyes took her in without drama. He looked at her for a moment. "You're younger than I expected," he said. His English was accented and precise. "You're not," she said. Something in his expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand." He accepted that. "I came alone," he said. "I know. I considered other options. I know that too." He looked at the valley. "My network is finished." "Yes." "Sarohi will give them what he knows within a month. Nazarov," a pause. "Less time." The communications architecture is already compromised. There are 11 people in 3 countries who will be identified by the end of the year. She said nothing. "That is the consequence of losing the initiative," he said. "I had it for 6 years. Losing it took 4 days. "You didn't lose it in 4 days," she said. "You lost it when you decided to sacrifice Sarohi and Nazarov to assess one operator." He looked at her. "That was a significant investment," she said. "For information." "Information about you specifically," he said, "was worth the investment. You are not a normal problem." "I'm a Marine sergeant," she said. "You are Iron Wolf," he said. "And Iron Wolf is the reason I'm sitting on this rock instead of rebuilding." She waited. "I have been doing this work for 20 years, he said. "I have encountered in that time perhaps 4 people who functioned the way you function, who saw the shape of situations rather than their surface." He paused. "I needed to know if you were one of them. I needed to know before I continued. And now you know." "Yes." "So why are you here?" He looked at the valley for a moment. "Because I am also finished," he said. "Not just the network. I am 53 years old, and I have been running operations since I was 23, and I am tired in a way that does not respond to rest." He said it without self-pity, the way you'd state a logistical fact. "I came because I wanted to see you. The thing that ended it. I wanted to see it directly." She looked at him, the composed face, the dark eyes that were, she could see now, carrying something behind the composure that hadn't been visible in the photograph. Not regret exactly, but the weight of a very long arithmetic that had finally reached its sum. "The man you killed in Nawabad," he said. She went still. "His name was Fawad. He was 26. He volunteered. I told him what it meant, and he volunteered." He held her gaze. "I did not tell him to do that so that you would suffer for it. I told him because I needed to know your capability at that range, and under those conditions." He understood the purpose. "That doesn't make it—" "No," he said. "It doesn't. I'm not offering it as absolution. I'm offering it as context. He died for information, not for nothing." She felt the weight of that settle in her chest alongside everything else she'd been carrying. "That's a cold thing to say," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I am a cold man. It has taken me 20 years and the end of everything I built to notice how cold." The wind moved through the valley below them. That same thin mountain wind that was always present at elevation, the permanent condition of being high enough. "What happens now?" he said. "You know what happens now." "You take me in." "Yes." He nodded, and there was something in the nod that looked almost like relief, which was the last thing she had expected, and which told her something about the weight that a person could carry for 20 years, and what it felt like when they were done carrying it. "One question," he said. She waited. "The Pancher, the non-lethal shot on Nazarov at 760 meters in low light on a wind shift." He looked at her. "Was that the limit of what you can do, or were you still inside your margin?" She looked at him for a moment. "Still inside my margin," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more the verbal equivalent of a very small concession. "I thought so," he said. He stood up, and he held his hands away from his body in the universal gesture of someone who understood the protocol, and she keyed her radio. "Cole, we're ready for pickup. 1 detainee, Eastern Ridge, lower shelf." Cole's voice came back, and what was in it she would think about later. The combination of relief and something else. Something that wasn't quite disbelief, but was adjacent to it. "Copy. En route." She stood with Mateen on the rock shelf, and they waited for Cole's element to come down the ridge, and the valley was quiet around them in the way high places are quiet, which is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something larger than sound, the particular scale of mountains that makes everything happening at human level feel provisional. "You could have shot me from the formation," Mateen said. "Yes, but you didn't." "You came alone," she said. "And you were sitting in the open." "So?" She looked at him. "So I wanted to know why," she said. He was quiet. "And now you know," he said. "And now I know," she said. The debrief at Bagram that followed was the longest she'd sat through. 6 hours, 2 separate intelligence teams, Briggs present for the first 3 hours, and the civilian from the Nawabad debrief present for all 6. Mateen answered questions with the cooperative precision of a man who had made a decision and was executing it, providing information that the SIGINT team described, in a moment of genuine visible excitement that they immediately suppressed, as the most comprehensive voluntary disclosure they had received from a source of his tier in 7 years. He was not doing it for a deal. He wasn't offered one, and he didn't ask for one. He was doing it, as far as she could assess, because he was finished, and the information was the last thing he had of value, and he was choosing to spend it rather than protect it. She sat in the room for the first 2 hours, and then Briggs took her outside. "Decker's people," Briggs said, standing in the yard with his coffee. "I know. They're going to say Nawabad was a failure. Nawabad led directly to Mateen's surrender," she said. "The sequence is in the record. Decker's people are going to say you were outmaneuvered." "I was outmaneuvered," she said, "and then I wasn't. That's also in the record." Briggs looked at his coffee. "SOCOM wants to talk to you," he said. "Not Decker's level. Above that." She absorbed that. "About what?" "About what comes after this," he said. "About Iron Wolf and what it does next and who it does it with." "I haven't decided what comes after this," she said. "I know," Briggs said. "They want to be part of that conversation." She looked at the mountains. "Tell them I'll talk," she said, "after I sleep." Briggs almost smiled. "That's the first non-tactical thing I've heard you say in a week," he said. "I'm tired," she said. "That's also not tactical." He nodded and went back inside. Cole found her that evening. She was at the range again, not shooting, just sitting on the bench with the rifle unloaded across her knees and the cold coming down with the dark, and the mountains doing what they always did, which was persist. He sat beside her without being invited, which she'd come to understand was simply how Cole operated. He read rooms and people and situations and acted on what he read rather than waiting for permission. "How are you?" he said. Not a tactical question. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's honest." "He told me about the man in Nawabad. Fawad." "I heard. He volunteered." "I know." "It doesn't—" "No," Cole said. "It doesn't." They sat with that. "You walked down that slope without cover?" he said. "Yes." "I watched you do it, and I have been in this work for 16 years, and I have never seen anything like it. It was the right call. I know it was the right call. I'm not disputing the call. He looked at her. I'm telling you what it looked like from the outside. From where I was sitting. She looked at the unloaded rifle across her knees. It looked like someone who understood what the situation actually was, she said. Yes, he said. It looked like that exactly. A pause. Hale is asking about you, he said, from wherever they've got him in physical therapy. He sent a message through Garza. He wants to know how the op went. Tell him it went. He's going to want more than that. Tell him the valley is quiet and Mateen is in custody, and I still owe him a debrief over coffee when he's out of the sling. Cole looked at her. Do you drink coffee with people? He said. Sometimes, she said, when they've earned it. He was quiet for a moment. Reed asked me something this afternoon, he said. He asked me if Iron Wolf was going to stick around, or if SOCOM was going to absorb you into something he'd never hear from again. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. She looked at the mountains. Neither do I, she said. What do you want? It was a question that people in their line of work didn't ask each other often. What was wanted was considered secondary to what was needed, and what was needed was defined by the mission, and the mission was defined by someone further up the chain. Want was a personal luxury that got managed in whatever space the mission left over. She sat with it. I want the next one to be better, she said. Whatever the next one is. I want the people running it to be better prepared than we were for Kunar. I want the intelligence not to cut the things that matter because they're inconvenient for the operational optics. That's systemic, Cole said. That's bigger than one op. Yes, she said. So maybe Briggs's conversation with SOCOM is worth having. Maybe. Or maybe, he said, you tell them what you want and see if they're capable of building something around it. And if they aren't, you go back to being a Marine sergeant with a classified file and a call sign nobody's supposed to know, and you keep doing the thing from inside the machine. She looked at him. When did you become an optimist? She said. I'm not an optimist, he said. I've just been watching you work for a week, and I'm operating on the theory that someone who can do what you do can probably do that too. She looked back at the mountains. That's either the most tactical compliment I've ever received, she said, or the least tactical. Probably both, he said. She stood up, put the rifle over her shoulder. I'm going to sleep, she said. Good. And then I'm going to talk to SOCOM. Good. And then I'm going to figure out what comes next. Also good, Cole said. She walked back toward the personnel block, through the cold of the Bagram night, past the lit windows of the operations center where Mateen was still answering questions in the methodical voice of a man spending down his last resource, past the medical tent where the light was yellow and warm, past the range she'd just left, and the mountains beyond it that were invisible now in the dark, but present, always present, the way they always were. She thought about Fawad, 26 years old in a jacket chosen to read as a silhouette at 900 meters. She thought about Reed and his trajectory, and the thing that was either healthy or sad, but was probably both. She thought about Hale and physical therapy, working to get back to a thing she suspected he would get back to because people like Hale didn't quit things they were built for, and neither did she. She thought about the paper in her chest pocket, which she'd been carrying for days now, and which had said everything it needed to say, and which she would throw away tonight because keeping it longer than necessary was the kind of thing that became weight, and she had enough weight that was genuinely worth carrying. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bunk and took the paper out of her chest pocket and unfolded it one last time. I see you. She looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it back up and set it on the floor and went to sleep. In the morning, she would talk to SOCOM. In the morning, she would begin to build whatever came next out of the material available, which was imperfect and incomplete and would require the same thing every operation required. The willingness to act on the best information available while knowing the information was never complete. The paper stayed on the floor. The mountains stayed where they were. And Maya Voss, who had been called Iron Wolf for 3 years by people who understood what the name meant, slept without dreaming in a room at Bagram, and when she woke she would still be what she had always been. Not the legend that other people needed her to be, and not the support personnel that other people had assumed, but something more difficult and more durable than either of those. Herself, doing the work. getting some things right and some things wrong, and learning the difference. That was enough. That was, in fact, the whole thing. The world will always find reasons to look past you. Your only job is to know what you are, and to be ready for the moment it matters.